Right, good morning, everyone. Morning. Welcome. So, formally, please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of Cabinet Committee Housing on the 6th of July from the Walton Suite in Winchester Guildhall. Time's just gone 10 o'clock. I'm Councillor Mark Reach. I'm the chairman of this committee and cabinet member for Good Homes. The meeting is live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. Recording will be available after the meeting. Subtitles will be switched on, and advice how to turn these on is set out online. Everyone, please make sure their phones are turned off. And can I remind people who contribute to use their microphones, please. In the unlikely event it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by the team. Could I welcome members of the public, members of the TAC board, visiting councillors to this meeting this morning, and I'll invite you forward when it's time for you to make a contribution. So, turning to the agenda item number 1 is apologies. Do you have any thoughts?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Becker, for whom Councillor Todd is deputising, and also from Councillor White, for whom Councillor Lee is deputy.
Thank you. And we were aware of both of those, so that's good. Number 2, any declarations of interest? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, may I declare that my husband is a trustee of Trinity, and that may come up obviously during the papers this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clear.
Thank you, Chair. I need to declare that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in items on the agenda due to my additional role as a Hampshire County Councillor. However, I don't feel there is any material conflict of interest regarding these items, and I have a dispensation granted by the Audit and Governance Committee that enables me to speak and vote on the matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I wish to make the same declaration as a county councillor.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Adams, you've requested to speak. I take it you'd like to do it at agenda item number 8. Thank you. Councillor is nodding. So we move to number 4. Mr. Tate, you would like to address the committee on 59 Colebrook Street, I believe, please. You know the rules. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the Cabinet Committee Housing. You may recall that on the 21st of May last year, I addressed Cabinet and I raised my concerns about what was happening to the dilapidated building behind 59 Colebrook Street. The decision to go ahead with a project was not made in open committee. I had to raise this matter under public participation to shed some light on it. For background, on the 21st of March last year, a planning application was submitted by the council to convert the existing derelict coach house into a residential dwelling to provide temporary housing for vulnerable local people. The application is still to be determined after almost 16 months. Why so long? I pointed out that the accommodation breached the minimum national space standards for affordable housing, and that, in my opinion, it would not be financially viable to build out unless significant grant funding or Section 106 monies were used. The planning application describes the proposals as a 2-bed dwelling, but in fact it is only a 1-bed dwelling, with the second bedroom or study at 3.7 square metres, definitely not a second bedroom, not even a box room. Probably worth members having a quick look at the plans. Who is the property for? And why will they get a study if it's just temporary accommodations? This is the 3rd occasion to my knowledge when the council may end up aborting a development project. First, there was 16 Tower Street, where the council secured planning permission to convert it to 2 flats, then jettisoned that and sold the building. Then there's the Corner House. After securing planning permission for 6 substandard flats, again, the project's been shelved. Still not sold after 8 months, and the price dropping ever lower, and now we have 59 Colebrook Street. I used a Freedom of Information request to ask to see the financial appraisal for this project, but I was told it was commercially confidential. Why? This is a council scheme. So what is so confidential about the figures? When Cabinet approved the refurbishment of the main house back in the 21st of November 23, the financial appraisal was published with the agenda. So what has changed? I actually spoke at that meeting, if some members recall. No commercial developer could afford to work in the same way as the council, to use Section 106 and right to buy monies as free monies. The recurring theme here is that large sums of HRA money are being written off because of ill thought out schemes, which end up being abandoned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. You raised a few comments in there. For members or for people listening to this committee who aren't aware, it's a building which is behind this very building where we're sat now. It's a very old building. It was a coach house to the rear of 59 Colebrook Street. There are a few things a few points Mr. Ian Tate made, which I'd like to address. One, the reason why it is commercially sensitive is because this project is out to tender, so it wouldn't be right. We talked about commerciality. Of course, we don't tell the others what the price is before we get the price back. I'm sure once we have a full financial case worked up, we can bring it. We'll publish it as we normally would. It wouldn't be right to do that at this stage. Separately, it's not an HRA scheme. This is a Homes for Ukraine scheme. With contribution from Homes for Ukraine. So the HRA will not be funding the building behind 59 Colebrook Street. But then more importantly, you say what was in your opinion, this isn't a particularly good scheme. In my opinion, it is. What we've got an opportunity to do here is right close to where all of the main services are, here in the city centre, near the council, near citizens' advice, near all the facilities on the high street. We will have a high quality piece of accommodation, so high quality homes for people who really need it, funded through Homes for Ukraine scheme. Subject to final tenders come back, I'm confident it'll have a positive business case, which we'll share in accordance with the normal procedures. But I thank you for your comments. And at that, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is minutes from the previous meeting held on the 2nd of February of this year. Can I take them as agreed, please? Thank you very much. We'll skip over Chair's announcements since we've got quite a packed agenda today, so we'll move straight to the new homes presentation, please, from Ms. Egan.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just join the meeting if I may, and then share my presentation. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Yep, thank you. So we move on. So first slide, as usual, is my programme updates. I think we've had a positive, if steady, 3 or 4 months since I last reported to this meeting. First bullet point refers to the Kings Barton scheme in Winchester, which obviously everyone will be aware that we're acquiring 146 units from Carla on that scheme, which is Section 106 units. At the time I published this presentation, we'd taken handover of 30. That's now 34, because this was published a couple of weeks ago. So we now have 30 affordable rent flats and houses and 4 shared ownership flats. The construction of the scheme obviously continues at pace. So we tend to get between about 2 and 6 units every month, just to give a rough idea of how that progresses. So that's going to take place over the next couple of financial years. Wanted to give a huge thank you to my colleagues in housing, many of whom are here today. I think our processes on handover have become, really robust over the last few months, with a lot of that going to my colleagues here. And I know it takes a lot of work every time we take a unit, because we want to take it well, and we want to let it or sell it, as quickly as possible, so it's not sitting void. And I think we've achieved that really successfully. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone on that. Moving on to Hazley Road in Twyford, again, a Section 106 acquisition, but in a rural area. where we're taking 10 units. Again, it's progressing well. Alfred Homes are building that out. Completions expected in January 27. So we're beginning to gear up for the fact that we'll be taking handover of those 10 units around January, February time, all being well. I then move on to Woodman Close in Sparshot. This is one that we're building ourselves. As lots of you are aware, 5 units. We're now formally started on site as of a few months ago, and our Homes England funding has been received. So we're really pleased with that. The foundations have been dug out. We're doing lots of utility work on that at the moment. So it's quite early stages. You know, a good 18 months in the build still to go, but so far so good. In terms of our programme and pipeline going forward, we're in lots of different discussions around Section 106 opportunities and also additionality opportunities, which is something we're really keen to progress with. We want to make good use of our Section 106 commuted sum funding. So we're looking at how we can use that on additionality units purchases. But we're also looking at our land-led schemes, because that's the other way that we can use that commuted sum funding. So we're looking at various sites that we own. Lots of those are garage sites, as I think I mentioned last time. Although obviously not sometimes the largest sites, they're just as complicated, if not more so, because of sometimes the easements, way leaves, etc., that run across them. So it does take a little bit of time for those to get going, and quite a lot of upfront survey work. You know, conscious though of budgets, we were really pleased to be successful in securing some council house building support service, which is the CHOS acronym there, some funding from them to help with that initial upfront feasibility work. So that obviously means that it's coming from them rather than our HRA, which is great news. On a similar theme, the Local Government Association have also recently announced that there's going to be a new round of Brownfield Land Release Fund funding coming out, and that will be available for bidding in a couple of months' time. So we're in touch with them to make sure that, you know, where appropriate, we can benefit from that. And that is funding, capital funding. So sorry, the original funding was revenue funding I was just talking about in terms of the CHOS funding. This is capital funding relating to the initial part of a site. So say demolition, remediation costs, and hoarding, anything that you need before a site is ready to go. You can apply to them for capital funding. So we're in touch with them, hoping that again we can make use of that and make our projects more viable. So that's sort of the general updates.
Just a quick, sorry, jump in there. Just for the purposes for everyone who's listening in, could you explain the concept of additionality, please? It's a bit of jargon we use all the time, but I think it'd be helpful for others to,
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. That's a really good point. So if we were to say you had a scheme that was a mix of market units and affordable housing units. So the affordable housing units is determined by your Section 106 agreement, which is a planning agreement. So under our new local plan, that may be, say, anywhere between 40% down to 25%, depending on the specifics of the scheme. So that's your section, what we call Section 106 units in shorthand. If we as a council purchased any of the market units, so the private sector units, so those that weren't part of that affordable housing Section 106 part, if we purchased them but used them as affordable housing, we call those additionality units. They're in addition to the Section 106 units. So you might turn what was a 40% affordable housing site into a 50% affordable housing site. That additional 10% are your additionality units. What's interesting about that is that you can apply a different kind of funding to it. So your Section 106 units, you can apply right to buy receipt funding to from our subsidies. You can't apply your Section 106 commuted sum funding to it, which is significant because we have, you know, some significant funds there that would be good to use. And that's partly why it's a good thing to do, but partly why we're exploring the additionality units, because we can put our funding, our Section 106 commuted sum funding against those purchases. Does that help?
I hope so. Thank you.
Then if I skip on the rest of my slides, you'll have seen when published, go through our usual forecasts. I don't tend to dwell too long on these just because obviously everyone has a chance to look at them in advance. But what we're showing at the moment is that as of the end of March 26, we had 357 completions. Worth noting that we're in contract for additional about 140 units, as in they will be coming to us. We've signed a contract, mainly obviously the Kings Barton units, but those that are also on site. And then this looks at from that position over the next 7 years, how we're going to deliver up to our 1,000 homes target. And looking at what we call the likely figure in orange, we have dipped very slightly below that 1,000 homes figure. But you'll see from the blue line, which is our kind of high estimate, it's just really difficult for us to know in 7 years' time where we're going to be. But we try and keep an eye on it and try and be realistic about what we can deliver. Ultimately, it will be really dependent on some of our Section 106 acquisitions and how successful we are in those, and also how many we can build ourselves over that period of time. So that's what that graph is trying to show everybody. We then have a couple of pie charts looking at the type of scheme, and this is by scheme, the type in terms of whether it's a Section 106, whether it's additionality, as we were just talking about, whether it's commissioned, which ultimately means we own the land and are building it ourselves, except whether it's rural, etc. So that's what these next two pie charts show. So this is by scheme type. And then if I flick on, this is by unit type. So you can see that when we do what the orange here shows is that when we do acquire a Section 106, it tends to be quite a lot of units in one chunk, which is why that orange gets bigger when it's by unit. We then look at our forecast in terms of what our RPs, our registered providers, our housing associations in this area are looking to deliver up until 2032, and then what we are looking to deliver up to 2032, which I always think is an interesting look at how that balances. And then obviously the total figures in the final column. And then our map, which shows where those schemes are, separated by completed, schemes on site, as in our schemes on site, early stage schemes, and then registered provider schemes coming forward. And with that map comes our list, which you can see here. And then finally, we have our demand map, which is obviously really key to looking at which areas we want to be acquiring or building in going forward. This was last updated, as you recall, in October 25. We do this once a year just because it's a relatively large piece of work for our housing colleagues to do for us. And also it doesn't tend to change hugely significantly over the course of 12 months. So the next time we have this meeting, we'll have an updated version of this map for you. And that is the end. So let me just stop sharing. There you go. Thank you.
Well, thank you. There's a few questions that immediately jump out from this. I mean, one, what steps are we taking to make sure that orange central case line goes back up to 1,000 where it should be? You alluded to a few before, but if you could expand on those, I think the committee would find that helpful, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, our 6 months ago adopted housing development strategy, which came to cabinet, obviously said that we were looking to balance our programme in terms of units that we'd be acquiring. So that's Section 106 units or additionality units, and units that we're building ourselves. I think the reality in the current market is that by acquiring units off developers, we do achieve a more cost-effective way of adding to our housing stock. But we also want to balance that with building units absolutely where we want them to be and to the specification we want, etc. So that's also why we're wanting to do our land-led schemes as well. But in terms of those Section 106 and additionality units, we talk to lots and lots of developers all the time, lots of agents, etc. We try and keep that network going. And about 8 months ago, we employed a new person into our team whose one of their key focuses is looking at that area, because we knew it was something we really needed to focus on and have a real market knowledge around what is happening. So we try and build on that. So it's kind of a combination both of the acquiring and the building. And
then related to that, the the two maps on page 19, page 21, one showing where we expect the schemes to be and also where the demand is. So crudely, the demand seems, you know, it hasn't changed a great deal since we saw these slides a year ago. But, you know, Winchester Town, Bishop's Waltham, Alresford, north of Portsmouth, and then a peppering throughout the rest of the district. How closely do those two maps align? So where we expect the development from both us and the RPs and where people would like their homes to be. And then the second question is how are we, because I think we are, but how are we working with RPs and other providers to share the information that we have about where we expect people to be?
So in terms of schemes coming forward, as in many ways you'd expect, a lot of the demand centres around the more urban areas of our district, albeit we fully recognise there is demand in rural areas, and that's why we have a strong rural section to our housing strategy. So you'll find, as you say, yes, there's quite a lot of schemes coming forward, for example, in the Bishop's Waltham and Waltham Chase area. You know, Denmead has some sites allocated in the local plan. Kingsworthy, we've seen schemes there. So the schemes that are coming forward do tend to match, not always, but broadly where that demand is. What we can do through our registered provider strategy, our housing association strategy, and our engagement with them is that we ensure that the New Homes team meet with our big registered providers. So we're talking Vivid, Sovereign, Asda, Abri. We meet with them deliberately, at least every 6 months, if not more, to make sure that we're saying to them what it is we need in those areas. And it's not just about the numbers per se, it's also about talking with our allocations team and saying, okay, yes, we need lots of units, but what type of units do we need? So things like 2-bed flats at the moment are less, you know, proving to be less popular. So we want 2-bed houses, please, but we want lots of 1-bed flats as well. So we're talking to them about types of units we want, not just where those units are.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee, please? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 questions. Firstly, regarding shared ownership properties. I think in the past we've had some difficulty getting those occupied, and I'd like to know what the current position is, please. And secondly, on our housing list, how many people do we have? How many households do we have in bands 1 and 2? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Power, and thank you, and pleased to see you here today as well. So thank you for coming on. Well, I understand. So where we have, or through Venter, where we've got shared ownership, that actually the feedback from tenants or owners, shared owners, has been very good, and we haven't had an issue looking to Mr. Hendy with the shared ownership homes that we have. But more broadly, I guess your question more broadly around, you know, shared ownership schemes across the district. Ms. Egan, do you have any insight?
Yes, so my team has an officer who deals with the shared ownership sales and also resales and staircasing. So, for example, at the moment, we don't have any new shared ownership properties available, which is great. We're about to get some at Kings Barton, just to say. So obviously those, you might see one on the market, but we don't actually own it yet. So the ones at Kings Barton, we've only taken 4 so far, and they've been really popular. 3 are exchanged, sorry, 3 are completed, people have moved in, and 1 is exchanged, about to move in. And the team always has, I'd say, about 5 or 6 resale properties throughout the district. So, and they tend to, it depends on where the property is. It depends on things like local connection, whether it's got that requirement or not. But generally, we don't tend to hold them for particularly long period of time. So yes, I wouldn't say as a council we have a particular issue with it. If that helps.
And then the question around band 1 and 2. I'm looking at Ms. Thorburn for that one.
Thank you, Councillor Reach. Thank you, Councillor Power. Alex is just hot off the press teamsing me with the exact numbers, but from memory we had 1 household in band 1 and just over 200 households in band 2. But when we get those exact figures, I'll ask Nancy to add them to the minutes, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the update. Always helpful. On your, on page 14, you talk about the new opportunities. How do we understand what they are and feedback and become involved, and where we may know communities are interested and may be supportive across the whole district? Because obviously this is a positive in terms of additional homes. On page 18, you talk about the RP numbers. I noticed further on in the papers today, we didn't have a huge response when we asked the RPs for some feedback on part of our policy development. How is it working with the RPs to get a clear understanding? I'm not sure that we all experience that level of clarity in the district and where some of the houses exist. And could you just talk to me, or maybe it's Councillor Reach, on page 20 about the Newland Parish project, given that Newlands is going to be moved to another authority? So just some clarity on that, please, Chair, if you can give it. Thank you very much.
I can certainly pick up on the first two, if that's okay. So in terms of the new opportunities that we mentioned, the issue with the new opportunities is that often that we're having lots and lots of discussions with different developers at any one time, until we get to a point with a developer or whoever it may be that we are perhaps under offer. That's the point at which we might be able to share that. There's a real balance, isn't there, between how much we engage versus kind of the commercially sensitive discussions that we have to have. So the minute we know that we're looking to do something, we'd obviously bring it to this cabinet, or to, indeed, obviously, in terms of actually acquiring something, we'd bring it to proper cabinet. Sorry, that sounds awful, doesn't it? Proper cabinet, sorry about big cabinet, full cabinet. Thank you, Councillor Cutler, for my apologies for my lack of professionalism. Don't minute that, Nancy. So yeah, so we would always bring to full cabinet any big acquisition that we'd be doing, but I recognise there is a balance between wanting people to be engaged. The local plan obviously does show sites that are allocated, and often it's those types of sites that we're talking to developers about. They are in our list of schemes that we'd really like to engage with developers on. But quite often a developer will be bringing a scheme forward, and they might have an existing relationship with an RP, or they may even be part of the same company, in which case that's not the sort of scheme we'd be necessarily looking at. They would be doing that their own way, but we would absolutely be aware of it through the RP discussions that we have regularly with them. And your second question related to registered providers. Would you mind, sorry, just repeating your question on that?
I noticed further on in the papers today that the RPs hadn't been terribly forthcoming in helping us on a particular consultation. So I'm just questioning that in the recent past, the RP relationship has been a little sort of ebbing and flowing, shall I say, and how well we understand their commitment to the area, their intentions, and that you're having meaningful conversations with those who have stock here and those who might have intentions of growing their portfolio. Thank you.
I can only really comment on my own relationship with the RPs, which I would say is strong. We have good, open, honest conversations about, you know, their current schemes and what they're looking to bring forward. But I'm really talking to them about new business, so I tend to talk with their new business side of their organisations, not necessarily any management side of things. And I know that I believe there's another forum that takes place around that, but I'm not involved in that, and I'd need to refer that to other colleagues around the table. But from my own personal position, I feel we have a good, strong relationship with them as to what they're looking to do, and they're all really keen to invest in our district, is the message. But they have the same issues that many RPs throughout the country have around needing to make sure that their stock is compliant, appropriate. You know, that they have big capital costs going on, or possibly revenue costs, in terms of bringing their, you know, making sure their stock is decent, as I think the word is at the moment. So, you know, sometimes new business gets affected because of that, but they're very open with us as to when that is taking place. And at the moment, they seem to be really invested into our district, which is great.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that as well, it feels like, that we must remember that RPs are really important in providing good homes for people in our district. There's obviously a period of change going on in housing more generally. It's affected us, it's affecting RPs. I think, without betraying confidentiality, I think we're already seeing that the RPs are now returning to the market, and they're showing some confidence in our district, in our area, and in the market more generally, which I think is positive. It feels that on a strategic level, we have a good relationship, and it feels that that's quite easy for us to have those discussions about long-term plans and capital investment and long-term, 10, 15, 20 years plus. Feels it's more challenging at an operational level. We do meet with the RPs at an operational level to discuss, their ongoing work with their stock. I also know that our MP is very keen to look at situations where they've fallen below the standards we expect. And I guess we keep reiterating that, for individuals who are at the receiving end of this, where they've not received service from an RP or indeed from us, there is social housing regulator now there to ensure that performance is driven up. So I think I would characterise it as it's a fairly uneven position with the RPs. The relationship is strong. At the strategic level, I think we still have work to do at a more operational level to make sure that we work closer together. You also had a question about Newlands Parish. Now, I'm going to sort of lean back and look at my two cabinet members to the left, both of whom have some interest and knowledge in Newlands, but both of whom are passing over to officers. So, Mr. Thorburn, please.
My understanding is that it's all RP and it goes across, but it doesn't really make a lot of difference. We don't have any interest in. I don't think we have any housing in Newlands.
But if we did, it would go to the South Eastern Unitary.
Thank you, Councillor Reach. It's a little bit more complicated than that because we've got the Bearwood site in Newlands, and there's a shared agreement for allocations at the moment between Havant and Winchester City Council. So some of the district some of that development falls in our district, some falls in Havant. What gets really complicated, without getting too technical, is Havant are pulling out of Hampshire Home Choice and a year before LGR. So we officers are working with colleagues to try and unpick that. But you're right, the Winchester City Council doesn't have any stock. Our challenge with Newlands going forward is looking at who's on the register in Newlands and how we support those families going forward. Thank you.
Again, we don't need to prosecute local government reorganisation again here, but I think it's a neat example of where we're going to, we have a similar issue with the New Forest, but the other way around, presumably for the future Mid-Hants Unitary, where part of the New Forest goes into Southampton or Southwest Hampshire, whatever the working title is, which then does complicated things to allocations and to temporary accommodation in particular and various other things. So at some point we will need to have a proper discussion about this. It's hard to do it as the organisation which ceases to exist in a couple of years' time, but I think give officers the challenge just to think about how as a committee we start to get into some of those issues around things like allocations policy. That might be quite a helpful thing to do at some stage. So we'll have a chat afterwards, but I think if we could just think about that, that would be helpful. Councillor Todd, you wanted to?
Yeah, and there's also the question as to how the development strategy might alter after local government reorganisation, where suddenly you have an authority for a different area. One of the questions I have is about how we respond to sources of funding. So I was at a meeting recently where I bumped into somebody from Homes England, and they were very clear that essentially, I'm sure this is completely unlinked to the timing of the next general election, that they wanted to get a lot of homes away in the next 12 to 18 months. And did we have anything? And similarly, we're hearing that the new Prime Minister is very interested potentially in council housing as opposed to RPs. So what new funding is coming through? How do we handle that? What other new funding might come through, and are there things we need to be ready to do to frankly land that and make the most of it?
Thank you, Councillor Todd. So you may be aware that we're part of the Wayfarer Consortium, which is a consortium of lots of different local authorities and RPs, and we come together to bid for Homes England funding. So we've been part of that for the last 5 years, and we are about to re-enter into that consortium for the new Homes England funding round, which is covering the next 5 years, which was announced a few months ago. That gives us really strong links into Homes England. We get regular updates from them, you know, go to regular consortium meetings with our fellow local authorities and RPs. So it's about knowledge sharing, but it's also really about having a greater weight when we're going to Homes England. So that's a really useful way that we have really good engagement with Homes England for that new round. They also link us into things like the Council House Building Support Service I mentioned in my presentation, revenue funding from government, and the Brownfield Land Release Fund, also funding from government. So that consortium enables us to have a wider reach than if we were just on our own as an organisation. So, you know, and once we hear of a new round of funding, then we obviously just will go and meet with the appropriate department that's bringing that funding out and go from there. But you're right, there is absolutely a really strong focus on council housing, it seems, at the moment. And Councillor Reach and I attended up in Leeds a summit recently specifically on council house building, which was attended by hundreds and hundreds of people. It was amazing. So there's a really strong focus on that at the moment.
Thank you. I mean, just one point is Andy Burnham's not our Prime Minister yet, but
No.
I take the point. There is a certain frustration that I think we've had over the years, which is we're hugely supportive of more council house building, but turning the taps on and turning them off on a kind of annual basis is really not the best way to build confidence longer term. And I think in the past we have struggled as being an expensive part of the country in which to do development. Is that fair? And therefore, when looking at where central government might allocate money, from their perspective, expensive leafy Winchester or somewhere else in the country which is more deprived, I think it's fair to say we have struggled in the past, and officers are nodding. So it, good and positive from our perspective that the policy is moving in that direction, but I would just slightly temper our enthusiasm because despite our best efforts, we have struggled in the past. Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful. I think thoughts as to how we prepare for this new world are worth doing. The second factor, and I'd be interested in understanding how the two interrelate, and I realise it might be one of those things that is hard to resolve, is what is the role of the combined authority in all of this? Because what we're hearing is that they have a strategic relationship with Homes England, and what's going on that front. They're talking about things like strategic place partnerships and the like. Obviously, it's going to take a bit of time for the Hampshire and Solent combined authority to stand up fully, but what's happening on housing and how are we linking into that, and new housing in particular? And if somebody else needs to answer, that's also fine.
I'm happy to go in. If I'm honest, I haven't heard much on that as yet. I think it seems to be such early days. There was talk of Homes England funding being devolved down to the combined authority, but more recently I've heard that's not the case. So I haven't heard it confirmed either way as to how that funding position will change. At the moment, the message is we still go to Homes England directly for our funding. And it's worth pointing out, I think Councillor Reach is absolutely right in terms of some of those funding streams perhaps haven't gone to our area. That tended to be around revenue funding. I'd say our capital funding for schemes has remained strong, and we tend to receive, good amounts of capital funding to support our schemes, albeit we still have to put in our own subsidy to make them viable. But I think from a revenue perspective in the past, we had struggled a little bit, but more recently we've been more successful on that front. So it seems that the momentum is definitely continuing under the current government. But yes, I'd need to hear more on that combined authority, and I wonder if it's just a little bit too early to know.
My understanding is at the time it was announced, they were told they would have access to a strategic place partnership. So maybe that's something that we could ask Mr. Hendy or Mr. Gordon to follow up. You can follow up directly. It feels like the council as a whole probably needs to engage in that question and just find out what's happening.
I think Mr. Hendy's taken that action, so thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back to the Brownfield Land Release Fund and ask that the the question about whether we have an oven-ready brownfield site register in place or in gestation. My second question was about rural exception sites. Are they progressing fast enough? The concern, of course, is in some rural areas, settlements don't have appropriate senior citizens housing to downsize into, and youths, of course, can't afford. So therefore, the demand supply figures you've shown us inevitably show the shift into the urban where the opportunities are better. And my third point was, I think it's been covered, is how resilient is the forecast following LGR? Thank you.
So brownfield register. Are you happy to answer that one? I think we do have such a thing.
I'm not aware of a brownfield register from a planning perspective. Do you mean? Question. I'd have to ask my planning colleagues about that. It's not something. So when I'm talking about the brownfield land release fund, I'm talking about it from land that we own. I mean, what I would say is that every brownfield site will have the requirement for that funding, but obviously it's only for affordable housing. And how that works on a market and affordable site, so sort of a more market site where there's a Section 106 element, it may then not be funding you could apply for because sometimes you can't combine those streams. When I've been talking to the local government association about it, it's been about land that we own as a council that we would develop for 100% affordable housing. So there's a slightly different positions depending on what piece of land you're talking about. But I'm not sure that we would hold that. I'm slightly looking at Mr. Hendy here, but I'm not sure we'd hold a brownfield land register that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Chair. And clearly there'll be allocated sites in the local plan which will be brownfield sites, but as Ms. Egan's said, that's not something that would be automatically eligible for brownfield land release funds. That's for public sector funding to bring forward affordable housing. The expectation would be the market will respond and look at the viability of those sites. So we clearly have a list of sites, as Ms. Egan said, in terms of the garage sites and other sites in the district which we're looking at accessing that funding to improve viability.
Rural exception sites, please.
Yeah, well, it's Rural Housing Week, so that's exciting, and we've got some good events happening and that we're taking part in. Much like development everywhere, it's so dependent on finding the land and finding a willing landowner who will sell their land, or if, say, it may be a public body, but often a private landowner who's willing to sell a rural land value. So we work really closely with Action Hampshire, who are, as I'm sure you're aware, a Hampshire-based charity that has dedicated rural housing enablers. I meet with them every couple of months, and the housing enabler in my team also does even more than I do. So, we have strong links with our rural housing sites, and we're aware of quite a few that are in the process of coming forward, but they do take a really long time. So, we're involved as much as we can be, we push them as much as we can be, but we also need to be mindful of the numbers of units that they deliver and the viability of those sites. And sometimes that's really challenging, but that's, again, where funding can come in.
Thank you. And I think we agreed we'll do a local government thing at some point in the future as things become clearer. That's really helpful. Conscious of time, I think, we'll draw a veil now, but move on. But incredibly helpful as ever. So, thank you so much for doing that. It's really, really great. So we'll move to agenda item number 8. Oh, Councillor Horrell.
Chair, sorry, I accept completely that the LGR and devolution piece is all evolving, we're all learning. But you did touch on a point earlier about allocations and Hampshire Home Choice, and actually just getting our house in order on that, because if you're selecting a home, it's not just for this month, it's for years to come. And I do think in that context, all that's going on with all the authorities, it would be good to have that at least pinpointed as an action somewhere in the housing portfolio, whether it's here, the policy group, wherever, that we might have a review of where we are to make sure we're in good order as we move forward into the new regime. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would agree, and it's something that we've discussed in regular officer meetings, or I've discussed about making sure that it's something that from day one we need to have absolutely right. There are some things that I'm afraid we will just have to deal with as the new authority comes into existence and we feel it out. But for day one, it needs to be right morally and legally. I know officers have already talked to colleagues in the New Forest who, of course, have housing stock of their own. There will, of course, be parts of the district which don't have HRAs, but will also be covered. There's a hell of a lot to unpick in all of this. And I think Mr. Henry was whispering in my ear that we're going to discuss it at Economy and Housing Committee. I think we'll bring a paper forward to that soon as well. So we all absolutely recognise this is something that can't wait. It needs to be ready from day one, which means doing the work now.
Thank you.
Councillor Adams, do you want to talk now, or would you like to wait till the end of this session? It's up to you. Come forward anyway.
Yeah, I won't take long, generally the busy agenda. Just some quick comments on the retrofit, specifically the Swedish cottage as sites, and the one in Southbrook College, just mentioned Lever in particular. It was just to say, obviously, members will probably be aware there's been a fair few delays to the programme there. In touching base with the residents, I think there is still some ongoing frustration, obviously, at those delays, but equally there has been some positive feedback around the communication from officers, and so thanks for that. I think since the last time I had spoken to them, we did have some issues with land use on an area which was parish council owned, which did cause some frustrations with the parish council. That's been resolved, and apology issued for that. So thanks again to those who resolved that. I think just it may well be touched on, and no doubt there won't be much opportunity for detail today, but I think it might be useful if we could have a little bit more regular updates to ward members and potentially parish and other stakeholders just on some of the progress and challenges that have been faced there. I think there is an understanding by residents of the challenges that have been faced with supply chain issues and contractors, but I think if we were able to provide a little bit more regular feedback, that would be appreciated, and specifically any reassurances around, given the very lengthy timescales with the programme, that nothing's going to be further delayed unnecessarily by the inevitable upheaval of LGR and things like that. So we'd like to quite a lengthy programme. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I was aware of the issues around land use relating to that development. Councillor Horrell, we've discussed it as well. So I'm glad that there's progress being made there. We can always do more and better and more frequent updates to ward members. So my word, we'll do that. I think that was it. Thank you for your comments. Ms. Burbidge.
Thank you, Chair. Just bringing up the presentation. Perfect. Good morning. Welcome to the retrofit July 2026 update. And just to say thank you, Councillor Adams, your notes are noted, and we will continue to engage as and when. With regards to the retrofit strategy, I have previously presented that we've got a due date, Cabinet February 2027. We're currently delivering along the lines of an outline strategy, and that really looks at the years 2022 to 2030 and beyond. The current status of the retrofit strategy is that it's in draft. We have engaged with our tenant policy group. We have just concluded our internal stakeholder consultation, and tomorrow we've got an exciting event for external stakeholders. And here we've invited energy experts, architects, engineers, delivery partners to really bring their expertise so that we can develop a robust, future-proof strategy. Once we have accommodated their feedback, we will then go back to our tenant policy group to demonstrate the evolution of the strategy, and then with the final document being drafted in August to September. I have in different formats explained the various changes in regulations and reforms This is just a slide to capture all of that, and a note to say that the team are constantly looking at that evolving and changing landscape. It is difficult to ensure that we are always and future-proofing against the changes, but we do, where possible, try to interrogate what we're delivering against the changes coming forward. There are ones that have already been released as of April 2026, so the programs are being adjusted to those new regulations, and then we anticipate the HEM regulation or the HEM calculations of, or the redevelopment of SAP, and that's had a slight delay. So we're keeping a tab on these, but do ensure that our properties and our programs include the changes. This is a familiar slide, and although, and I must apologize because I've shown the slide many occasions in the past, but always assume everyone understands what it is. And recently I was asked to please explain through it. So I'm going to take just a minute to explain what it is. And therefore, in the future, I know everyone's on board. So apologies to those who know it and understand it. On the left column, we have all our programs, and every year we either have new programs or ones that have been concluded. So we start off the probably the longest program, our Swedish cottages, wave 3, that really looks at all our houses, our energy assessments, and this is really a big push every year where we do a bulk of energy assessments to really understand our property. So we never really go into a home until we understand it. We have our conservation area single glazed windows, our multi-use program, and that's really an exception with a lot of research. And then we report on our fellow colleagues' energy improvements, cabinet wall installation, loft installations for response, and planned maintenance windows, which improve the thermal performance of a property. The next 3 columns provide targets against properties we're looking to do work in and measures we're looking to deliver in each of those properties. Alongside that is what is the EPC uplift from those measures installed. And the last 3 columns are really where we are, what is the current status. And at the moment, after Q1, we've had 36 properties improved and 39 measures installed, and we've got an EPC uplift on the basis of energy assessments coming through as EPCs already. Warm Homes Wave 3, as you know, at 2026, as I've shown before in the beginning of the year, we're sitting at 71% of our stock as EPC C and above. As we proceed with the Wave 3 program, we're looking to achieve 85% of that EPC and above rating. And this really looks, as I said before, on our houses. So looking a little bit in depth into what this program looks like, we are rolling out the solar program and battery for 700 homes over the next few years. And that program looks to accelerate. So the way we see it is the solar and battery brings energy reduction and benefits to our residents quicker, and it brings the uplift of our EPC ratings in a quicker program, while we continue to deliver a fabric on a slower pace in order to ensure that we deal with those appropriately and each home receives the fabric improvements that are required. So where are we at the moment? We have this year completed 53 energy assessments. We have 15 new signed solar agreements and in total 200 solar agreements, and that's a real big push and real recognition for the team. We cannot deliver solar without those solar agreements, so they're really important, and we're really excited by the uptake by many of our residents. We have secured our solar delivery partner, our fabric delivery partner, and the last one, the single measure item, is really just trying to understand how we accelerate. So where we've done pilots, where we're really secure in what we're doing, how do we reformat the program and the delivery so that we're delivering single measures in a specific sequence to accelerate. And then finally, just a few figures on where we are with the solar installations. As of April, which was our full month with our 36 trial properties, half of those installations are consuming 50% of the solar produced. Self-utilization, so 78% reduction in energy bills, and on average, tenants are saving close to £372 per annum, and those are on our smaller properties. So we only look for that to increase as we deliver solar on our larger properties. Just a little bit of a testimonial in terms of the delivery of the solar. So reports on quick effectiveness, cleanliness, helpful resident engagement, and a little bit of a limelight for the team in terms of the Social Value and Community Impact Award nomination. The Swedish cottages, we have 3 homes of the 21 that will receive a new roof and windows. So that will move from 14 to 17 at the end of this financial year. And the strategy for this has really changed. So I had a really committed colleague of mine explore various options for the Swedish cottages. It's close to our house as a team because obviously we've worked really closely with the communities, and we've come across a new installation product. We have gone to site to view the installation of the installation. We've felt it, we've touched it, so there's no hazardous products. The contractors come out to the properties to evaluate it. And there is a thermal product that we can install within the existing fabric that will help improve the thermal performance of these homes. We've just got the final stamp from an engineer to ensure that moisture within those homes won't be exasperated by any installation. And we've identified 3 homes to receive a pilot. We have spoken to the residents in person, and beyond the pilot, we'll be looking at adding solar and battery so that we can ensure these properties are getting the best of all our measures. And then finally, we're also looking at various options in terms of heating in properties that are electric. We're looking at infrared and how that pairs really well with solar, and how we can ensure these homes are cheaper to run and obviously are gaining from those solar and battery installations. And lastly, we're still working and continue to work with the tenant business cases. Where are our residents need more support, where are there opportunities, and where actually is there need for additional custom support. So we are still working with our residents on that. Conservation area windows. As before, we delivered 22 last year. We've got 8 remaining properties. Really pleased with the installations, and many of our residents are happy with the installations. Apologies, moved on to the next item. And the ordered properties. So we're working closely with our delivery partner on those ordered properties. We have sampled more than 10 as of today. However, there have been quite a lot of last minute cancellations by residents. So I think there's a slightly larger piece of engagement that we need to do on that piece of work. Initially, we thought there would be a welcoming of that investigation, but I think the communication just needs to be improved to get access into our homes. But we continue to collaborate with our delivery partner, who is still committed to getting our homes up to standard. And then I won't read through these, but there are a couple of feedback from our window installations. So again, cleanliness, speed of installation, aesthetic of the windows, welcoming of the new ventilation strategy. So really happy residents. Multi-occupancy retrofit scheme. So this is really an inception. It's quite an exciting piece because we've got so many lessons learned that we can adopt into this program. We've got 1,875 bedsits, flats, masonettes, etc. Of that, 216 units are below EPCC. As I said before we begin any program, we really look at our properties to understand what it is we're working with. So we've commissioned retrofit assessments of the 216. 106 have been completed, and of those 106, 68 have already come back as an EPCC. So our properties are really performing at a higher level than we originally thought. There is a lot of research into this multi-unit program to how do we deliver measures that are not just bulk standard, that are right and future-proof. So we've looked at other local authorities, we've communicated with, we went to Oxford a couple of weeks ago to the Wadham College, how they're using data monitoring to really evaluate what those properties require. Obviously in Oxford, we're looking at how to treat properties. So we're interrogating where there are good examples and how can we replicate here those good examples within our stock in the right way. Currently, we've got procurement underway in order to deliver measures to lift those properties up to an EPCC, and then looking at that tenant engagement, which is being revolutionized. So on this program, we're looking at smaller groups, more custom engagement, and really a lot more graphic understanding of what the retrofit process would look like. Winnow flats, I won't take you through all those points because I've been through them before, but I think what's really a highlight is that we do understand from a high level as officers, we've created an options appraisal in terms of costs. So we understand what the costs are on this project, and the second phase is just to understand what additional funding we can get through the government in order to really spec where this project sits. At the moment, evaluating all the funding schemes, we are in a bit of a lull and a pause, but we continue to interrogate where those additional funding can come through, either for the design or the piece of decarbonisation of those units. So where are we if we take into account the wave 3 and the multi-unit properties? So I've already spoken through the wave 3. And then with the multi-unit properties, that takes us to 88% of our properties at EPCC and above by 2028, which leaves us with another 12%. And this is not including the fact that our energy assessments are reflecting higher EPCs than originally forecast. And then the last slide is just where we are in terms of engagement. So the team really have moved away from just doing written correspondence. We are working towards a lot more in person, and that's really because on the Swedish cottages, we need to bring our residents along. They need to understand what the issues are that we're faced and how we mean to improve their homes. On the multi-unit properties, those are far more smaller initiatives. And then the wave 3 and the solar panel agreement, that really does require in-person communication, phone calls, letters, so that tenants can bring brought along but understand the benefits of the scheme. That's it for me today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Fascinating stuff as ever. I mean, a few things to come out of that. One, sorry we didn't win the award for the retrofit programme, but we were shortlisted, so it shows the good work that went in there. But particularly really pleased to hear that, you know, we are looking at innovative solutions. So this phone's ringing. Not now. So we're looking at innovative solutions for where we've struggled with things like Swedish cottages. So that's great. It's also great that we've taken tenants through that, so they can, you know, see what's going on. So that's all really, really very good. I'll ask my normal 2 questions. I know I've asked them before. One, the thing that doesn't quite come out of this presentation, excellent though it was what it actually means for a tenant. And yes, we've got that figure about £370 a year. You know, what does it mean for someone who's had the insulation, who's had solar, who's had battery, and why should they tell their neighbours to do the same? Would be really helpful. And then the other thing, much like kind of new homes, you know, we're on target almost, we're just not quite at that level. So any comment about that kind of final few percentage points, which we will struggle to get to the requisite level of energy performance, please?
Sure, thank you, Councillor Reach. So I think in terms of what this means for residents, I think as a team, we're certainly in a place where we're beginning to deliver measures that really give bang for our buck, to be honest. So for the solar agreement or the solar installations and battery, we've worked incredibly closely, and that was based on the nomination for the ward with our delivery partner to ensure that standardization of solar and batteries are quick and efficient. They meet the needs of the home. They're not overspec'd. So they're right in terms of first outlay capital cost and in terms of what residents are receiving back with reduction of their fuel. We then assist that with the development of the fabric installation. So we're just not leaving it as solo. How do we make our properties warmer or cooler in the summer? How do we ensure they're ventilated correctly? And how do we ensure we're future-proofing against those new standards that are coming in? So it's not just, you know, how we get them to EPCCs, full stop. It's a case of looking at the fabric, that needs to get to an EPCC, looking at the smart readiness, solar, and looking at finally at the heating. So we are pushed through regulation in order to ensure all facets of the home are addressed, from lowering energy and ensuring it's a warmer, cooler home for all. On your second item, which is in terms of acceleration, so there is appetite to accelerate on the wave 3. I think the pilot was really successful, of those 36 delivered, and we feel optimistic with the delivery partner that we can accelerate on a lot more homes. So it's just understanding the first or the second 2 quarters of this year, what that appetite is and how we can ensure that we deliver at a much faster pace. And then with regards to the multi-use properties, because that's really an inception, we're being really conservative about numbers. So again, we'd look to decarbonize and accelerate on that a lot faster. So by 2028, we're looking at 12% being conservative. But as we say, as with those energy assessments come through and they see better EPCs, we should be in a much better position. So I think as a team, we're far more secure in terms of our delivery, our retrofit partners, and ensuring that we're delivering the quality for all our residents as we initially targeted to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Can I ask about some of the lessons learnt from the solar and battery monitoring? And one of the facets that was discussed, I think was in full council, maybe within the housing group, was the issue about how do you share in a fairness way the benefits that a property will, gain when another property, because of its aspect orientation, can't. So that was that question. And then the other one was, you mentioned overheating, which is obviously very topical at the moment, overheating resilience, and how are we changing our approach with respect to thinking about keeping warm and keeping cool, given those challenges technically and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. So I think with regards to the solar installation at the moment, it is just about data analysis. So as we have 36 installed and we've got monitoring systems in place, we can really understand how much our residents are saving. I think within a year and a half, 2 years time, we really will have a depth of data to begin to interrogate how that fairness works. On the onset is to demonstrate the effectiveness of the delivery of the solar and the battery, and to bring our tenants along to ensure that they're happy with those installations, that the solar agreements are working, and that everyone feels it is a fair program. I think that's our first challenge at the moment, which we're targeting. We are in the background really looking at a number of monitoring systems in order to ensure we get good data to understand what our savings are. And from that, we can then follow to integrate what is that fairness, where does it fit, and what are our policies around that. So it's just kind of taking one step at a time. In terms of future proofing, absolutely, it's a, excuse the pun, hot topic today. And it is something that we're looking at. So when we look at ventilation, are we doing the right thing? Not for now, but in the future. And already I begin to speak to the team about future proofing. We also have had, obviously, climate or sustainability teams meeting with ourselves and asset plan maintenance managers in order to understand what the repercussions are with future proofing against climate change. What are the risks? What are the major issues in terms of the climate change aspects that will impact our homes most, and how do we begin to design those out? So it is something that we're beginning to look at and interrogate. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. As you know, I have a nervous disposition, and when pilot schemes are mentioned, I would like reassurance, please, that the ward councillors will be informed before there are any pilots in their ward. Secondly, on the multi-occupancy retrofit, we have free space in a magazine that goes to all houses, either at parish level or at the ward level, or in some cases at Winchester level. We can use that to inform residents in another way that might mean they pick up the measure. Please use your councillors when you're looking at doing some retrofit work that may be news to tenants, because they can accost us in the co-op and give us a grilling on it. And that's a second level of reassurance. So please use your councillors. Thank you.
And we discuss this a lot, and yes, I'm sure we will. So we can always do more engagement. I was accosted in Sainsbury's yesterday, not the co-op, but you know, the point applies. So I'm sure we will, and particularly around the point around pilots as well. And it goes the other way. I would also really, ask members to come along to the event we have tomorrow. I'm sure we can squeeze members in. I'm sort of slightly strong arming you here. There was a nod there, but please do come along. It should be a good event. See what we're doing. But also when we have an opportunity to, when we're out and actually meeting tenants and residents, we'll extend the invitation where we can. So come and see the work that we do too. That would be really helpful. Councillor Hurrell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Always helpful to get the update. On page 26, could you just explain a little, because you had two charts about windows. You've got planned windows, 302 properties. Could you just clarify what that refers to on this chart? Thank you. And also, just to reiterate, I think we discussed this before, it would be really helpful if all councillors were kept, particularly on some of these hot topics like Swedish cottages, updated on what's happening. I don't think we've had an update since this last meeting, which is helpful to have it here, but obviously other things are happening in the meantime. So that dialogue with us as ward councillors on some of these key projects would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. So yes, planned maintenance deliver windows upgrades, and these were suggested to be reported as improvements because, excuse me, they improve the thermal performance of the property. So planned maintenance obviously installed those, and those are calculated within our targets for the year. And we've got dedicated window program for the more hard to treat properties like conservation area windows, which require planning permission and ensuring that the details of those windows are a little bit more specific. So that's the difference between the two window programs. And then with regards to engagement, yes. So with regards to the Swedish cottages, it's a little bit tricky because there's been a few months where a lot of development has happened. So we visited residents quite a lot because we visited them and said, okay, we're here. And then later on, excuse me, later on, you know, we came up with a new solution, but certainly we feel now confident as to what we're doing and therefore feel we can begin to engage. So thank you very much. We will take that up.
Thank you.
Councillor Todd?
Yeah, I'm interested in to what degree what you're doing is sort of integrated into business as usual. So obviously there's been a whole programme of work to understand EPC levels and the like, but there's also a programme to do a full and detailed stock survey of everything. And I wondered if that is feeding into your work. And perhaps, you know, we've talked about an external measure like EPC, one that is a genuinely tenant triggered thing would be damp, mould and condensation. And I just wondered how what you're doing ties into that work stream and how we join them up.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. So yes, I work quite closely with my planned and asset manager to my right, Chris Irons, and with my repairs and response maintenance managers in terms of evaluating property. So when we say retrofit assessments, it's different to an EPCC and it's different to a stock condition report, although we do take into account the stock condition report. So retrofit assessments are a bit like stock condition reports on steroids. They're very in depth in terms of what we get. So there's a ton of information that comes through, and we then begin to evaluate those against damp and mold cases and against what our planned teams are delivering. So we're looking at targeting a sequence of installations that address quite a few issues within the property. So our evaluation of each home is not just what we get from our retrofit assessments. We put that against what the repair works have been raised for their property and against what our planned maintenance colleagues are delivering, and then ensure that our delivery is coordinated with that delivery, or that we are ensuring that we're sequenced correctly. So that is very much the background work that that takes place. So we're not just feeding off one stream of information. There's a number of streams of information that pour into our program.
That's really helpful and really encouraging. Does damp and mold trigger retrofit sometimes? I mean, you've talked about a flow where we know we need to do retrofit. We've done a retrofit assessment and we fitted in with all the other work that needs doing, which is great to hear. I just wondered if that offers, do the two correlate? Is that a way into finding places that might need an intervention?
Yes, it actually works both ways. So where we do have damp mold, either installation is the option that they need to go put forward. That we have worked with our response repairs to make sure that where damp and mold is being addressed through retrofit measures, that we alerted and evaluate the property as a team ourselves, and vice versa. Often where there is a property where we feel we're going to be putting insulation, When we do that, we do look at whether there are damp and mold cases. So it's not working in total isolation. It's making sure that we speak with our response maintenance to ensure that where there is a damp and mold issue, that we're dealing with the core issue. So one of the items that I pulled through and didn't actually mention on the wave 3 is that we've got something called an enabling works program, and we've set that program out with our plan maintenance colleagues in order to ensure that a property is retrofit ready. So when I talk about retrofit ready, it's to make sure that where we see perhaps causes of damp and mold, whether it's drainage or whether it's a leaky rainwater pipe or whether it's spoiled bricks, that those are identified and rectified prior to the installation of retrofit to ensure that we are getting it right and that we're not exasperating any damp and mold issues within the property. So with regards to our program, when I say we're accelerating on the solar, but we're doing a little bit slower work on the installation of the fabric, it's in order to ensure that enabling works program can run ahead of us, so that once we get to the property, it is retrofit ready and many of those core issues related to damp and mold are resolved before we put in insulation.
Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 28, and I see there's a line there about single measures contractors piloted. I just wonder if there's a danger if you've got an over specialized contractor doing work and doesn't understand the more holistic aspects of the problems in buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. It's a good question. So what we've learned over the time, and we've spoken about lessons learned, is that actually handing over a lot of the work to our contractors and expecting the main contractor to pull all of that through for us in a good quality at the forefront manner is almost near on impossible. So what we've done is to say, let's use our SMEs who are experts at what they do, and we can coordinate them. We know our properties well. We know what needs to go in first. We engage with our residents really well, and let us ensure that we can coordinate the work so we can accelerate in a way that we know we can ensure quality. And if you're going to the expert, they know what they're doing. What we were finding with large main contractors is that a lot of the wool was being pulled over our eyes in terms of whether they were coordinating the whole piece, and we do that anyway in-house. So it was just really a way of how do we accelerate but ensure quality at the same time.
Well, thank you. Conscious of time. I mean, again, really excellent. Thank you for the update. Yeah, so thank you, and thank you members for your questions. I'm going to just slightly rejig the agenda because we've got Tony from Trinity. So rather than sitting through all the rest of very important things, perhaps not completely relevant, we'll go to agenda item 13. I'll give you a second just to get set up. So just take 30 seconds. Okay, thank you. Sorry for rejigging the agenda. I didn't want to catch you out. So if we could now move to agenda item 13, please, which you'll find at page 339, so towards the back of the pack. I'll just say a few words and then pass over to you, Ms. Quinn, if that's all right. So this relates to, it's on behalf of Councillor Becker, who isn't here, and relates to homelessness, rough sleeping, and the domestic abuse grant. In the past, these have been separate pots and they've been done on an annual basis. This year, the ministry has seen fit to give us a longer term settlement, which is very good. And this is something that in conversations with Trinity, who are represented here, but other services in the town are very keen to have a longer term view, which helps investment and helps build confidence. If I pass over to Mrs. Quinn, would you mind introducing the paper, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks approval for Winchester City Council's homelessness, rough sleeping and domestic abuse grant spending plan for the 3-year period for 2026-27 to 2028-29. It's a significant report because it's the first time that the government has provided multi-year homelessness funding settlement, which is ring-fenced, and it gives councils the opportunity to plan strategically and invest in longer-term solutions rather than relying on an annual funding decision. The report sets out how the council will utilise the total allocation of £2.66 million over the next 3 years to support homelessness prevention, rough sleeping services, domestic abuse duties, and the implementation of new legislative burdens. It also seeks approval for the associated use of reserves and Homes for Ukraine funding to ensure that we can continue to respond effectively to local housing pressures. The proposals have been developed in line with the government's new national approach, which places greater emphasis on preventing homelessness before crisis occurs, in turn reducing rough sleeping and ensuring that domestic abuse survivors receive appropriate accommodation and support. And this aligns closely with our own Preventing Homelessness and Rough Sleeping strategy, which was published last November, and supports the ambitions set out within the council plan. The spending plan continues investment in the services that we know are already delivering positive outcomes locally, including our homelessness prevention, our outreach services, Housing First, tenancy sustainment support and resettlement services, to name a few. It also provides stability for both staff and our partner organisations who support our Preventing Homelessness agenda through a planned 3-year programme, allowing us to retain expertise, maintain effective partnerships and focus resources where they have the greatest impact. The report demonstrates that prevention remains the most effective and cost-effective approach, and by helping people remain in their existing homes or access suitable accommodation earlier or recover from rough sleeping more quickly, we can reduce reliance on expensive emergency responses and expensive temporary accommodation measures, while also achieving better outcomes for our customers. You will note that Winchester continues to perform strongly in comparison with many other local authorities. We have a very low use of bed and breakfast accommodation, and we have no families or 16 or 17-year-olds accommodated in bed and breakfast. We have a continued focus on ensuring homelessness is prevented wherever possible. And Q1 for 2026, the last quarter, demonstrated we prevented or relieved 56% of our cases, which puts us in the top 25% of local authorities for our performance. And the funding and spending proposals within this report are designed to protect and strengthen that position over the coming years. Finally, the report provides an opportunity to ensure the council is well prepared for any future challenges, including the increasing complexity of our customers, the implementation of new legislation, and the transition to local government reorganisation, and ensuring this will support delivery of our statutory duties while continuing to improve outcomes for some of the most vulnerable people in our district. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 2 initial questions I think would be helpful to frame this. One is, what is our assessment of in particularly homelessness and rough sleeping across the district? I know we carry out a census, so the latest information we have about that. And then secondly, there are some comments in the report around Renters' Rights Act and new burdens funding and the like. The relationship between the Renters' Rights Act and what we think that does to homelessness duties and is quite complex. So a few words, please, on how we expect that those two, sorry, I'm waffling, how the Renters' Rights Act will affect people presenting to us and how it will affect the duty that we have. I think I would find that really helpful, please.
Okay, for the, I think, were you referring to our annual rough sleeping count figure?
Both the count and your assessment as professional, you know, what the picture looks like across our district, please.
Okay, yeah, sure. So last quarter, we had 104 assessments for households coming to us advising that they feel that they're homeless or threatened with homelessness. We will do a full housing assessment and determine what duties we owe them. That figure has increased by about 16% on the previous quarter. We analyse figures each quarter and we look at what our demand is coming in, and then we measure that against the supply going out, which was presented in the Temporary Accommodation Pathway and Plan in November 2024. At the moment, although the demand is increasing slightly, we've increased our stock of temporary accommodation, we've increased the flow through of accommodation because people wait less time before they're then housed into social housing. So at the moment, we're on quite an even trajectory with that. There aren't any concerns around any increases that we're not able to manage within the service at the moment. The annual rough sleeping count figure last year was 5, and we're probably expecting something similar along those lines. Again, we monitor that closely with daily outreach and our monthly rough sleeping flow. So as it stands as of today, that's all quite steady. In respect of the Renters' Rights Act, it's very complex. You'll hear from John's paper later about the impact. At the moment, we've got a few inquiries. We're not seeing any huge demand from that, any huge concerns that are coming through, and that's on par with what our other local authorities in Hampshire are seeing as well. There hasn't been a huge influx, and we saw a very small increase in cases approaching before the cut-off. We thought we might have seen sort of a bigger demand from landlords trying to get in before the cut-off date. We saw a few cases, but nothing, again, to be overly concerned about. On the whole, I guess we're hoping that will mean that there is stability for people in the private rented sector. We're still managing to support households into the private sector through our prevention work. And we hope that, I guess, those people who are currently in the private rented sector are going to be able to sustain their tenancies and remain in the private rented sector for longer than they have been able to previously. Does that answer the questions?
Yes, it does. That's really helpful. Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you for the brief. Obviously, good news, multi-year settlement. I just wonder, there's lots of figures in here and so on. Not an easy overview of how much funding is directed towards prevention versus crisis response. I wonder if you've got a sort of a feel for that. And what measurable reductions in homelessness are we going to expect as a result of this funding and our approach? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the figures have changed this year. Previously, local authorities could only spend about half of their grant on temporary accommodation. This year, the government's changed that, and local authorities aren't permitted to spend any of the grant on temporary accommodation, which is fine for us in Winchester because we spend a very low amount on bed and breakfast and temporary accommodation. But generally, it should be at least about 50% that you're spending on the prevention and front end. But much of our work is already loaded at the front end, and we're not spending too much on the crisis.
And the other half of my question was, what's the response, do you think, of our new approach?
Yeah, I think that we're already in a really good positive position with our prevention. I mentioned we're generally always in the top 25% of local authorities, despite the continued demands and pressures and complexities of the cases. So I think for us, success would look like just sustaining that and remaining in the top quartile for our prevention and relief outcomes.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I am delighted by the multi-year settlement. Thank you very much. Have neighbouring authorities received that settlement as well? I'm mindful there of the import of homelessness we have seen in the past from other districts. And secondly, will this fund be ring-fenced geographically in the face of local government reorganisation? Thank you.
Yes, so all local authorities received the 3-year funding settlement, and I'm sure are in the process of working out how best to prioritise and spend that. And in respect of your second question, local government reorganisation, we've obviously set this paper out to protect our staff and services as much as we can, but once we enter local government reorganisations, decisions may change.
Councillor Clear.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, appreciated, and yes, pleased with the funding, but could I just ask a couple of questions about homelessness, etc. What interventions are working, is it possible to tell me? And which are not delivering outcomes, if it's possible. And how are we coordinating with the homelessness in general, with health, police, voluntary sector and outreach teams? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clear. We do analysis, like I said, with the temporary accommodation pathway plan. We manage our supply and demand, and we analyse that quarterly to look at what is working and what's not. How many some of the interventions can help a really broad range of individuals quite quickly with small interventions, and some of them, people who are rough sleeping, who have really complex needs, who will take them a long time to potentially recover from rough sleeping, might need a more sort of intensive approach, which might take quite some considerable time to help relieve their homelessness situation. So we've got lots of support, and what the ending homelessness plan through the government has really prioritised is that support for individuals. So we've got Housing First, where we've supported 5 individuals. We've got our complex needs navigator that works with 10 individuals. So they look like they're quite small interventions, and our flexible prevention grant helped over 50 households. So it's all of the interventions that we have continued have worked in some way or another, but on different scales. And your second question was about how we're working with other partners. So we work really closely with other partners. We have our homelessness pathway meeting monthly. We have multi-agency meetings going on probably every day with our partners, with the police, with adult services, with the mental health team, with children's services. Some of that is on a sort of low-level case-by-case basis, and some of that is through some of our multi-agency partnership meetings, Oval, Housing Pathways, Marek. There's multiple, and some of the names are escaping me at the moment, I'm afraid. But the partnership working is good, and we wouldn't be able to achieve some of the outcomes that we achieve without those partnerships arrangements in place.
And then finally, Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. And actually, thank you for an interesting discussion at the Policy Committee the other evening. And I think we all say hallelujah for a 3-year settlement. How helpful is that? I just wanted to endorse your approach in terms of preventing homelessness and the lack of use of bed and breakfast, which we know is a huge burden to some of our other districts locally. So a really important strategy that you have here for avoiding that. And on 1118, I'm sort of, I think it's a good reminder to all of us, the complexity of the working parts here, of who's involved and the measures that everyone is taking, all the different individuals who are involved in trying to manage this really important area. So we clearly have committed to workers. If I take outreach, which I know I'm very keen on, as always a really positive element. On that table, though, I just wanted to clarify the conversations you've had with the Beacon and Trinity, who are reliant on grants and have obviously had grants change recently, whether the monies that you're proposing to give to them for the next 3 years will allow them to continue to be an equally valuable partner with us. And also just wanted to question on the purchase of the 2 new properties for temporary accommodation, because obviously managing this throughput, having control of stock is a really helpful element for us. And are we in a position that we can progress those in good time, because adding that to the portfolio is really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. So I have been in conversation with both Trinity and Beacon regarding the grants. As you mentioned, there have been a lot of changes over the last couple of years with the grants, and obviously we're really keen to support both those partners who provide invaluable accommodation support services to all of our customers. So that those grants are sufficient for those agencies to continue the good work that they've been doing over the past few years to support us. And the second part of your question. Okay, thank you. Karen will take, Mrs. Thorburn, take that.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Yes, the reason for the recommendation to buy 2 temporary accommodation, there's some clear points in the report, is because some of our individuals have very complex needs and some of our temporary accommodation is very traditional and they don't go together. So, for example, we have ground floor fully adapted temporary accommodation. So we need to expand our portfolio to meet the more complex needs. And I am confident, working with our estates team, that we can purchase those 2 properties, hopefully this side, and be occupied this side of Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Final question, Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, huge thank you for all the work you've done to put us in such a good position. And you know, there's a real, the paper is clear, there's a real vindication of our prevention focused approach, and it's reassuring that grant funding is starting to follow that. And I know that we had the department MHCLG visit during the local government reorganisation discussions, and they were hugely impressed by what your team does and wish that the rest of the country were doing the same, frankly. And I think the fact that we're able to build on our strategy and use this funding to effectively strengthen and accelerate the work is a real vindication of what you've done. On the subject of LGR, one of the years we're talking about for the 3-year spending is 28-29. And I think it is, and one of the conversations we've had with other charities with whom we contract is that it's quite important to be in contract ahead of 28-29 so that that plan doesn't get derailed or reopened as we get nearer to it. Might be a question for Mr. Hendy, but can we make sure that we're in contract and that the contractual obligation carries over to the new unitary so that there's no ambiguity or swerve in terms of ensuring that our current approach is funded and supported as we reorganise.
That's Mr. Andy in a second. I mean, that was certainly one of the basket of reasons for structuring this the way we have. That was front and centre of our mind when we were putting this together. Mr. Andy, any further colour to add?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you said, that's one of the reasons the report has been cast the way it has, in that we're moving the voluntary organisation grants into the current year, 3 years worth of funding in the current year, and we'll be entering into a memorandum of understanding with them over the use of those funds, so that in effect the funding that supports those services will be in place for the 3 years, and therefore it's not affected or prejudiced by any future decisions that might happen because of LGR.
All right. Well, look, thank you. That's been really helpful. Lots of positive things in there, and I think we all agree that the multi-year settlement is actually, is excellent. And I know it's something that partners have been asking for. We'll move to the recommendations, which are on page 340. I won't read them all out. I don't think I need to. So I will ask whether we all agree with the recommendations as they are set out, page 340 from point 1 to point 7. Are they agreed? Agreed. Excellent, thank you. Well done, thank you. We will just take a very short break now, just a few minutes, because we've been going now for over 2 hours. So if we can meet in 5 minutes, please, do a short adjournment. Thank you. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. We now go to agenda item 9, which is the consumer standards update. That's at page 37 in your agenda pack. Got Mr. Doyle, who's going to help with this. I'll do a very brief introduction and then I'll pass over and then you can fill out the gaps. So this is around the assessment of landlord services against the regulator of social housing consumer standards. As we all know in this room, we self-referred to the social housing regulator over a year ago now. That's right, just over a year ago, because we were aware that we were falling short in a number of areas and needed to do better. So we thought actually it's best to be proactive about this and work collaboratively to try and drive up standards. We had a C3 judgment, which I think we expected we would. And since then, through this committee and others, we've talked about the work we've been doing to really drive up that score. But as I always say, the most important thing is not really the score, although we'd really like to get a C1 judgment next time around. It's about making sure that our residents, our tenants have good, warm, safe homes to go home to. As part of the work, we've had HQN. I should have made a note. Housing Quality Network. Thank you. HQN came and helped us with an audit in which they interviewed me. They interviewed. I'll put my false teeth back in. Interviewed Councillor Becker and many officers over a whole load of areas, looking at the service and looking at where we could improve. And their assessment of where we stand. Now, their report is included in full at the back of this agenda item for all to see. But I think it's fair to say in summary that their assessment was we've made really, really good progress. If we want to put a number on it, their suggestion was we're near a C2, but I think that's being a little pessimistic myself. But if I pass over to Ms. Doyle, then hopefully you can help fill in the gaps and tell us why you think actually it's a C1. Would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the oversight there, because I'm going to repeat some of what you've said. So the Consumer Standards Report updates Cabinet Committee Housing on progress following our self-referral to the Regulator of Social Housing. That was in April 2025, and our subsequent judgment of a C3 rating. So the report highlights our ambition of improving and achieving a C1 rating through service improvements and inspection readiness work. So achieve this ambition, the Housing Quality Network, HQN, they were commissioned to undertake a mock inspection. That was in May 2026, and their review assessed performance against the 4 consumer standards. So that's transparency, influence and accountability, safety and quality, neighbourhoods and community, and tenancy. So HQN found that the landlord service has made clear progress in governance, I'll put my teeth back in, compliance and tenant engagement, with strong foundations now in place and evidence improvements and provided assurances, particularly around the safety and quality standards. So that was a real positive. They identified further work was needed to demonstrate full compliance with regulatory standards, and that was across all 4 strands, and in particular highlighted the importance of the quality of our property, tenant and household data, our performance reporting and evidencing our service outcomes. So HQN concluded through the self-assessment that achieving full compliance is realistic, and it requires a robust improvement plan with clear ownership, timescales, along with success measures. So the Consumer Standard Service Improvement Plan is in the report for agreement. It highlights our action plan and demonstrates our focus to ensure we can drive our continuous improvement across the landlord service, supporting the goal of achieving a C1 inspection and judgment outcome. That's kind of an overview. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I assume I'll have some questions. I should say thanks to members of the tax board as well for coming along. Were you interviewed as part of this process? Yes. You were. Okay, excellent. So tax board also interviewed. That's great. Questions from colleagues. Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you for the update. So what are the biggest remaining barriers preventing C1, and what measurable improvements should we expect in the next 6 months? Interested to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lee. As you can see attached to the paper, there's a very high level improvement plan. At Housing Leadership Board on Thursday, we're going to break that down to more operational to put that into low, medium and high priority from their report. One of the things that stands out to me at the moment is not having an up-to-date asset management strategy and everything that's entwined with that. Chris Irons, who sat to the left of me, will be bringing the asset management strategy to November's Housing Cabinet for approval. But at the moment, as you know, we're doing a stock condition survey. So a lot of the points they make about the 5-year plan, the 30-year plan data, we're about 500 properties off finishing our survey, which then will feed into the asset management survey. So that's one of the items I think puts us at risk of not achieving that, but we have a plan on how to achieve that, so I'm confident that we will. The second part is about knowing our tenants and knowing who's in our homes, and Sarah Hobbs's team, the Influenced Insight team, putting together a strategy on about how we best prove our tenants' data. So I'm not sure which format that will come through, whether it's a decision day or cabinet, but that strategy we're putting forward as well. I think there are 2 key areas that we absolutely must concentrate on first. Thank you.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you, and thank you for the report. It's really helpful to have this. I suppose 2 things that are sort of worrying me, and one is the data gap that we have. You mentioned one, obviously stock condition, but obviously we had IT plans for the housing team, but obviously with LGR and the like, perhaps we're trying to make do a little more. But that focus on data, which they say is a priority action, I just wonder whether we're putting enough attention on that. Be grateful for some reassurance that that is really in hand, and also particularly on the area of following through on the activities. It's very clear that the staff are very supportive, but they're also worried about changes, they're worried about IT systems, and therefore is that translating back to some of the lack of accountability and sort of chasing down that they mention on page 100 of their report. So just again looking for a better understanding of how this is being grasped and how we're going to make those changes really matter to be able to deliver the outcomes that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. IT and our roadmap. We have a roadmap, and we're certainly not putting that on hold because of LGR, because that is the absolute crucial point of everything that we need to do to move forward. So Sarah Hobbs and her team are working very hard in supporting all the other teams in delivering the modules, and there's an order to which we can do that. So another paper in a moment talks about the new R&M contract, so we need to make sure our system is fit for purpose to be able to deliver that. There's other modules like neighbourhood and community safety, domestic abuse that we're working through to eventually the end goal is to have a CRM. So all those modules talk to each other. So we're absolutely on track to fill that. Regarding data, we've just had a restructure within the data team to put the resources where that needs to be. So again, that team are both working on that. Also behind the scenes, we are also implementing lots more policies to make sure that we are C1 compliant. So we've just taken 2 or 3 decision policies to decision day with Councillor Reach, and I expect that journey to continue. Regarding the activities, and I absolutely note HQN's point about the pace of change and how staff are feeling regarding that. And there's 2 points to that. Obviously, there are staff that were part of that C3 judgment, and it's about working together, picking them up, morale, and it's also about the team that are inheriting this and having to take this forward. And what we're now doing is every quarter we have a Shines event with the whole service come together, half in the morning, half in the afternoon, and we work as a full service because we are one service to serve our tenants and our residents. And actually the last session we did about financial accountability, and we did a workshop on that, and this session coming up week Monday we're doing a whole session on ownership and about how we own cases from point the start to the end. But it's also now about a culture of driving that through team meetings, one-to-ones, appraisals. So we are working very hard to reassure the staff, and they're very supported by their leadership team, by their members, and by our corporate and by our strategic director. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Lee?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was reflecting on paras 1.1 and 7.1 about council plan outcomes and the environmental considerations. And everything I've just looked at, it seems to be environmentally neutral, or it's not explicit in terms of the necessary journey towards net zero in the things we're doing. Does that get considered? And if so, how? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. I was hoping that somebody might ask this question because within that report, you'll note that the HQN inspectors said that our retrofit programme, stroke decarbonisation programme, is the best they've ever seen in all of their inspections. So I think it's absolutely centre point of everything that we do. Thank you.
Good to hear.
Well, wonderful. That's great. Obviously, we wait and see, you know, when the next inspection comes along from social housing regulator. Do we have any intelligence when we think that might be?
Thank you, Chair. We met with the regulator last week and they confirmed, although all local authorities have to be inspected by the end of financial year 28-29, they recognise because of LGR, they will have to inspect us before that date. So smart money is towards the end of this municipal year.
Thank you. Final comment or question from Councillor Horrell?
Thank you, Chair. On 11.15, it talks about the plan, which is obviously important to keep us on track to deliver, is going to be monitored by HLB and PAC board. But I just wondered whether that was coming out to the broader domain of Cabinet Housing or the TAC board, just so that everyone knows that we're the direction we're heading in a broader context, not just internally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. 2 points there. Mr Hendy and myself have agreed that we're going to bring performance report by yearly to this cabinet. So we bring the housing strategy and how we've progressed the previous year, but we also want to bring a performance report halfway through the year. And secondly, for 2 reasons, one for our own assurance and 2 for LGR Ready, is we are setting up a housing assurance board. So that will, and we're working closely with Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, who have a C1 rating and have this board. So all our performance, whether that's on tier 1 projects, whether that's this action plan, will come through that housing assurance board. And on that housing assurance board, we will have a member, there will be an independent resident, and there'll also be a tenant as well as key officers. So we are hoping, if it all runs smoothly, that goes live on the 1st of October. And the reason that sets us up for LGR is that LGR become more topic specific because we will be bigger. So at the moment, for example, PAC board looks at the council across the whole. Come LGR, it may be that one board can look at housing, one board looks at children's services. So we're trying to prepare. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Just before I take the recommendations, since Lynn Mellish is here, who has been can I just pay tribute to all of the work you've done on the TAC board, because I think this will be your last meeting as a member of the TAC board. For those of you who haven't been involved, the amount of reading is like this, but then sort of multiple times over. And then we meet in the evenings, and then you know, you don't have to come along to these, but you've always come along to Housing Cabinet. So thank you for that as well. Well, we would welcome that because, you know, you've been very helpful and very thoughtful. So again, so thank you for all of the work you've done on the TAC board, and we will miss you. And again, just a plug for members around, if you're aware of any other constructive tenants in your wards who you think would be good at the job, you know, Lynn has left some very large shoes to fill, but please send them our way. So no, thank you. So the recommendations are at page 38. So we're being asked to note that HQN were commissioned to assess us against the consumer standards and agree that the consumer standards service improvement plan located at Appendix A. Are they agreed? Excellent, thank you. So we'll now move on to agenda item 10, which is the tenancy strategy. Laurie is still in the hot seat. Just bear with me while I find them in my papers. So yes, agenda item 10, it's the tenancy strategy and tenancy management strategy. So this is it's on page 103. And again, this is something that is a regulatory requirement or legislative requirement for us to have this in place, and this governs the way that we would expect registered providers in the district to look after tenants and the kind of things we would expect them to do in their tenancy agreements and the like, in order to deliver what we're trying to do on sustainable tenancies and on homelessness and various other things, many of which we've already discussed in this meeting. Are you happy if I pass over to you?
Thank you, Chair. So this report seeks approval for a revised tenancy strategy 2026 to 2031, alongside a new tenancy management strategy 2026 to 2029. And this is in line with our statutory duty under the Localism Act to create a framework for tenancy sustainment, homelessness prevention, resident wellbeing and effective management of social housing across the Winchester district. So the strategies in the report respond to significant housing pressures. So the number of households on the housing register, the rising affordability challenges, increasing homelessness and housing pressures, along with the growing complexity of tenant support needs. So a key strategic shift in these documents is away from simply managing our tenancy types and looking towards a preventative tenant-centred approach. So where we're focusing on early intervention, tenancy sustainment, financial resilience, partnership working and support for vulnerable residents. So again, lots that we touched on today. The new tenancy management strategy, so that sits underneath the tenancy strategy, introduces a clear customer service commitments. So as we mentioned before, it includes a named housing officer, a single point of contact, clear set standards for tenancy management. So for example, new tenant visits within 6 weeks, clear response times to our case management, whatever case that might be, along with our complaints handling. And actually through the documents and through the consultations information we received, that it was all about communication and how that's key in everything that we do. So the strategies have been shaped through extensive consultation with tenants and partners. So priorities being security of tenure, affordability support, community safety, communication, resident influence and stronger multi-agency working, which supports compliance with our social housing regulator, or the Regulation Act, along with our consumer standards. And that's all being taken into account when putting together these documents.
Thank you. I guess the first question is, it's a comprehensive piece of work, and it's great that it's been done co-created with residents. That's excellent. It's expansive in both its geographical scope and what it's trying to achieve. How will we measure its success and check that it is right?
Thank you, Chair. Very good question. It's an overarching framework. So it's something that all resident providers need to have due regard to when they're creating their policies and procedures and their governance. So I can answer from our point of view. Karen might want to mention more from a strategic side, but for us, it would be measuring it in line with all our policies and procedures. Everything we do would need to adhere to this overarching framework, and we would measure that through those standards that we set. And like I mentioned, like making sure new tenant visits are done on time, that we're getting resident feedback, that resident feedback is being used to shape our service delivery. I don't know if that answers the question. But...
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Councillor Rich. Yes, we have an RP forum that's organised by our Strategic Housing Service, and if this is adopted today, then at the next RP forum we will launch this to our registered providers, and then it's about them having due regard. So our actual enforcement is quite hard, but it's about them understanding why this is important, why it supports our residents and our tenants within our borough. Thank you.
So I guess that then leads to a kind of second question, which is, having due regard. How aligned are we with other local authorities? Because of course, if we're a bit of an outlier, that's going to be more difficult for them to have due regard. Is this fairly consistent?
Yes. So in the producing of this strategy, we did some benchmarking with our neighbours that we will be, so New Forest, because they are that we'll be merging with, and also officers, including Mrs. Doyle, went on the HQN best practice training. But parts of the strategy, when we talk about homelessness, for example, RPs have a duty, like others, to prevent homelessness. So there are elements of that that we'll be able to have more control over than others. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the update. I had a question about how will vulnerable tenants be identified early under this strategy? Is there a change in approach? And then the obvious question, Chair, is about strategy operating under LGR and how that might look. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I can answer the first question, if that's okay, about identifying early residents who require support. So part of the piece that was highlighted was tenancy sustainment and the support for our more vulnerable residents or residents who require additional support. Mental health was highlighted as one of the main points. So from that, I know Strategic Housing have a tenancy ready programme that's set up now. That's a new initiative, which I know Mrs. Thorburn and Mrs. Quinn will be able to provide more information on if needed. From our point of view, we do pre-tenancy assessments. So we would pick up, we would do some pre-tenancy work. So we look where that person's come from. We speak to them about any support needs they may have, and we can then put in early intervention at the start of a tenancy. If they do slip through, which I hope they don't, then we do a new tenant. That's the reason for the new tenant visit. So we would pick it up at that visit there as well. And we have our in-house tenancy sustainment team who do lots of work around maximising income, but also around signposting, for additional support to our partnership agencies as well if needed. So, okay.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Thank you, Mr. Doyle. In relation to the LGR question, well, two parts really. If I just backtrack, we are as a service in process, I suppose, of co-producing a vulnerable person strategy with our residents and tenants. So again, that will come to a future cabinet or a future decision day. Regarding LGR, all our three other partners require a tenancy strategy, even though Test Valley and East Hants don't have a stock, because it's about what your RPs are required or regarded to do. All four of our strategies have a different end date, so that will be going on the list of a piece of work. At some point those four strategies will have to be merged, but it is on a very long list of other things that we have to do. Thank you.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, if I may, couple of questions. Going back to page 138, it talks about performance and outcomes framework, and very clearly that you want to look at the performance and measure against the strategy. I'm just seeking guidance as to what that will look like. Where is that? How frequently? How will that be done? Because you have a very clear articulation of that there. And also on page 129, we recognise the importance of visible neighbourhood management in supporting safe, well-managed and sustainable communities. But that isn't just us, that's obviously other providers. So how are we going to deliver that to ensure that that is consistent, particularly in areas where perhaps it's a mixture of housing that makes up the community. And also, I mentioned earlier that obviously for this piece of work, you were seeking input from via consultation from other organisations, and you only had 2 RPs replying to you. Do we feel that's a good measure of that input? Or should we be trying to seek further content, given the importance and, as Councillor Reach has said, growing importance again in our district? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. I'm going to take a couple of those questions and I'll hand over to Mr. Doyle. I'm going to go in reverse order about the RP consultation. Yes, it was disappointing, but we had to set a time frame in order to be able to produce this strategy to come to this committee. So a lot of work was done, phone calls, emails, reminders, but you know, everybody's busy, and I appreciate you know, that it is very difficult. So yes, we would have liked more responses, but unfortunately we didn't get those. Regarding poor performance management of especially the tenancy management strategy, and you'll see from the earlier paper in the HQN slides, one of the things that will be coming to the Housing Insurance Board is about the tenancy measures as well as the compliance measures. So number of vulnerable residents, number of evictions. I mean, there's quite a long list that Laura does provide that comes to Housing Leadership Board, but that's going to be formed part of the Housing Assurance Board. And I'll pass the third question over to Ms Doyle. That might need prompting on what that was. Thank you.
That was around visible community engagement.
So apologies, how we measure that, or how we're going to.
Now we're going to, because we have a very important aspiration here about the community, but that's not just us, that's the RPs and others, because the community is made up of a broader mix. How are we going to make sure that that comes, that is delivered, given it's a very important aspiration? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell, for the clarification. I think that would sits within our community safety partnership, which we're all part of, along with registered social providers. This interlinks actually to the consumer standards as well, and the work that we do, and the HQN recommended estate walkabouts, presence in communities. The reason that we have our single point of contacts as housing officers is because we want them out and about on their patches, not sitting behind desks in the office. Sign-ups out on patch, visits, visibility. It's so all back to the communication again, but it is that community safety piece, that community safety partnership, which we are all a part of, and again with the buy-in from other registered providers, it's us all having this overarching framework that we work towards. So I'm hopeful that the changes we implement, you will see us out and about, because that's the intent of that. Thank you.
Councillor Clear.
Thank you, Chair, and you may have answered a few questions I was coming up with. Firstly, what evidence underpins our approach to tenancy length, succession and affordability? And I think you might have covered this, was how are we ensuring that vulnerable tenants are not disadvantaged by any policy changes? What could this strategy unintentionally increase homelessness or tenancy failure? And the last one, sorry, is monitoring outcomes, i.e. arrears, evictions, sustainment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keir. I might have to come back for a couple of those questions. Regarding affordability and succession, affordability is something that the tenancy services team will do prior to allocation, nomination and sign up of the tenancy. So there is a quite clear formula on that the team will follow. There is no legal definition of affordable, and the government's guidance in the Code of Guidance is that your housing costs can be 2/3 of your full household income. That's not a test we use. So the team would have statistics on those tenancies that we've had to refuse due to affordability, and they are reported into our Hampshire Home Choice report that comes out quarterly. Regarding succession, that's quite clear in statute on how we proceed with that. I think for us, more importantly, it's about how we deal with the family members that are left in the properties, and how we deal with that empathetically and compassionately, as well as working with it within the statute. Sorry, I've forgotten the other questions now. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So again, any policy we have has equality impact assessment, and we make note of that. Most of our policies now are co-produced with our tenant stroke residents, so, and the TAC board, and you also got, and also with our vulnerable tenants. On the strategic housing side, now we have a tenancy ready programme that works with our families and households that are in temporary accommodation, because they are deemed some of our most vulnerable tenants, and we're making sure that they're tenancy ready before they move on. We have our tenancy sustainment team. So, for example, all our Housing First clients are, if they move on, eventually would be referred into there, and also anybody that any officer identifies as vulnerable would be referred into our tenancy sustainment team. And regarding arrears, we monitor our arrears very clearly, regularly, monthly, and I'm really pleased to say that we've got some of the best performance in arrears collection with about 1%. So I think that covers everything, Councillor Clear, but please let me know if I've missed anything. Yeah, I don't see this strategy should increase homelessness. If anything, it should prevent it. Yep, thank you.
Councillor Cutler.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, my initial response to this was that you spend time creating a very good housing strategy and our own management, tenancy management strategy, but how do we enforce it with RPs? And I think you already answered the fact that it was difficult to do. And I don't know if you've got any ideas as to how one sort of, because you actually have no powers to enforce, but how this is an element of shaming to enforce, or whatever approach you take. And it also struck me that you mentioned about the two authorities that don't have HRAs that have had to produce one of these strategies. Did they have the competence to do it? You know, they don't have a housing team, and I just wondered, when it comes to LGR, how these are merged, and I would imagine enforcement from those authorities was even less likely.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cutler. Having worked for one of those authorities for 22 years, I would say that the officers are as equipped as we are in dealing with that strategy, and they work very closely with their RPs because that's the only providers of their social housing stock. Regarding enforcement, yes, it is hard, but the tenants of all those properties have the ability to go through that RP's complaint process and go to the Ombudsman if they have any issues. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll turn now to the recommendations, which are page 104 in the agenda pack. And it's that we approve the tenancy strategy that was at Appendix 1. We approve the housing services tenancy management strategy at Appendix 3, and that there's delegated authority to the corporate head of housing consultation with the cabinet member for Good Homes for All to make any minor amendments, typographical corrections, etc., etc. And prior to the publication and implementation of the tenancy strategy and the housing services tenancy management strategy, the dates which are set out there. Are they agreed, please? Agreed. Excellent, thank you. So we'll now move on to agenda item 11, which is the repairs and maintenance procurement and audit update, which starts at page 199. So yeah, so from page 199, this gives an update on repairs and maintenance procurement. This is the end, well, it's not the end, this is the end of the beginning of quite a long process that we've discussed a number of times in this committee and the cabinet and I believe the council as well. The contracts have now been awarded, as are detailed at page 200, which I'll read out. I'll do it again. I'll do the recommendations, but repairs and maintenance has been awarded to Waits Property Services. Heating and electrical contracts have been awarded to Signix Limited. And then we'll look at the audit action plan and progress made to date. So if I pass over to Mr. Irons, please.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, just as the Chair's kindly covered, so the report focuses on the procurement of the new housing repairs, maintenance, electrical and heating contracts undertaken to support the Council's Good Homes for All priority and improve service quality, compliance and resident satisfaction. So following a two-stage Procurement Act 2023 open public tender, the R&M repairs and maintenance contract has been awarded to Waits Property Services, and this is on a 4+3 year term with mobilisation underway and contract commencement scheduled for the 1st of August 26. The heating and electrical contracts were procured separately through a compliant Public Contracts Regulation 2015 framework, and both were awarded to Signix Limited, as the chair stated, and those contracts commenced in May and are structured on a 3+1+1+1 year agreement. The procurement strategy prioritised service quality over lowest cost, using a 60% quality to 40% cost evaluation model, which helped drive environmental social values within the quality assessment to ensure the best value and support and to support the wider council objectives. Following the audit carried out of the repair service, an improvement plan was developed in January 26, as detailed in the reports, and has been overseen through the Housing Leadership Board and PAC Board governance agreements. Actions already implemented include new process documentation, improved invoicing and payment controls, enhanced recording of inspections, and stronger contract management requirements. The new contracts with Wates and Signix are designed to address many of the audit findings and then help strengthen the financial, operational and compliance controls going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And as I say, we've discussed this a number of times, and there's passive provision made in these contracts for local government reorganisation. Hence the contract terms, which you'll see, which look a little odd, but there are reasons for that. The other thing to stress as well, again, that I think TAC boards were involved in the assessment of this too. So we have involved tenants in the assessment of the tenders. So again, in line with what we're trying to listen better and work together, tenants were also involved. Do we have any questions? Ooh, lots of questions. Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is, how will the contractors be held accountable for quality, and how will the social value and carbon reductions be measured, please?
Thank you, Councillor Lee. So on accountability, we've built robust measures into the contracts. So one of the key things that we've built into the contract is the need for evidence from the suppliers. So the suppliers, for every job that they complete for us at Winchester Council, they need to take before and after photos of the work they've carried out to show what was needed, how it was left. Those photos are retained and available to any of the officers at Winchester, so we can audit that. And then we have also, as part of our mobilisation and part of these contracts, we've also actually moved decision making into our management system. So we're moving away from the old email to approve works and stuff, which can be a bit haphazard, and we're moving into a system built into track any job variations, job costings, and then give us that full assurance breakdown and governance around that as well. So we've got those elements built in. And then we're also adding in levels of customer feedback as well, because conscious quality isn't always about what we can visually see, it's about what the customer experiences. So we are building in key text messaging. So essentially, as part of the contracts, customers will receive text message reminders of their appointments, en route messaging, but also once we've actually finished the appointment, the customer will receive a text message through to ask how that appointment went. That would be within 3 hours of the appointment completing. Any response that we receive back where a customer says we weren't happy, they will receive a phone call initially from one of the supply chain partners to understand what led to that. And then if we need to do further intervention, that's managed through the operational sort of contracts within to Winchester for us to then pick that up as well and support that piece. Social value. So we've both the contracts are heavily sort of floated around, or not floated, but positions to include the social value. And one of the key things is, we want to get proper social value, not, tick box social value. And we've been very, very clear both with Signix and Waits on that. They've got social value leads. Signix have already kindly sponsored some events within Winchester as well. So they've got, you know, they mobilised in May. They're already sponsoring some events with us and looking at how we can support what we do socially. Some examples that we're looking into is, you know, Signix have kindly offered to look at community centres, perhaps where we could install some better quality heating, hot water, etc., to support them and reduce their bills. So this is what I mean when I say that we're looking at proper social value, not necessarily you know, someone offering to do a litter pick or something. This is real stuff that's going to help deliver and drive that for our residents within Winchester and our families. Thank you.
And my question on carbon, the actual environmental aspect. My last bit of my question was about the carbon value, the environmental value. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, so sorry I missed that question, so I do apologise, Councillor. So around the carbon reduction, so the suppliers were scored on their environmental impact, so they're actually progressing fleets that are electric to help improve the impact within our immediate area, and they've also either currently secured or have offices being secured where they're sort of running on solar powered air source LED lighting. So they're trying to manage their immediate impact from actually getting out and doing the work, which we know, you know, operatives driving around can always not, you know, impact on that. But they're also employing greater technology around how they manage those operatives. So what you might see as a traditional diary where a tradesperson used to go in the morning, pick up their day's worth of work and crack on, that doesn't actually support good customer service, to be frank, or the environmental impact. So what happens is the operatives will receive one, maybe two jobs at a time maximum, and then as work evolves, we see jobs come in and we see customers, you know, perhaps change appointments, then we can sustainably manage the resource where we've got it to ensure we're getting the people at the right time to help reduce sort of drive distances. The suppliers are also bringing innovation in, so I've arranged a joint visit for us to just go and look at what Octopus Energy are doing, for example. So we went with the retrofit team up to their warehouse and had a look at some of their decarbonisation work, and perhaps see if there's anything in there that we can embed in what we do as well. So we're already seeing that come through from the new suppliers.
Councillor Clear? Oh, was it Councillor Porter? Sorry, I miswrote.
Ms Ryans, you'll see a common theme developing from those of us with council houses. I'm cautiously optimistic. My only reservation is that I'd like to know if the staff were too paid from the previous contractors.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Any staff that were eligible for 2P were given the option to 2P in. The new suppliers are set an expectation around behaviour and what we want to see delivered to our customers. But yes, all staff who were given or have the right to 2P were given that option.
Sorry for calling you Councillor Porter, Councillor Power. That's begin with the same two letters. Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask, on the Waits contract, we have the 4 years and then we have a +3. At the +3, what is the barrier or the hurdle you have to go through to go to +3 in that contract construct? And then I know it's gone to the audit committee, but we've obviously tripped up on our internal audit and had found some weakness in our governance, risk management and control elements. Can you tell us where we are now? I know there was a report earlier in the year on that, those findings and actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. So for your first question, the 4+3, so there will be a contract review point with Waite Property Services, and it'll be the same for Signix as well, where we can review the KPIs that have been set as part of the contract term, understand performance against those KPIs, and then that will either allow us as Winchester Council to invoke that contract extension, or we can at that point decide to go out to procurement if we're not necessarily satisfied that that extension is going to provide us what we're looking to achieve going forward. And in answer to your other question around the ordinance and governance, it's I think one of the measures for me is so I had to, as part of the contract mobilisation, I had to help with the demobilisation. So that meant dealing with the outgoing supply chain partners. And if I look at the heating and electrical contracts, which we've fully demobilised now, what was really reassuring going through that process is when we get to the final account, the final account was what I would refer to as an extremely clean final account. So it was very good. We didn't have any unexpected billing. We didn't have any lapsed invoicing. We weren't owing suppliers. So for me, that gave me clear indication and confidence that actually the measures that we've put in place to ensure that we are managing that throughput and that the finances are taking effect, because if we hadn't have done that, final account would not have just been within standard expectations. We would have seen some extreme billing or some heavy sort of reconciliation from Winchester, none of which we had.
And if I could, sorry, could I just ask, is that across all elements, all contracts?
So
or
yes,
just the one that you mentioned?
yes. So the final account was for electrical and heating. We get to final account the response contract. However, through the demobilisation works we're doing with our current supplier, we are not expecting any significant impact on money owed or money due in.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you. That's really helpful. We look turn to the recommendations then, colleagues, which are on page 200. So that we're asked to note those contracts that have been awarded and the audit action plan and progress made today. So I'm happy that they've been noted.
Yep, agreed.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nearly there. So we'll move to agenda item 12, which is around private sector housing enforcement policy and civil penalties policy. I'll do a quick introduction, then I'll pass across to Mr. Corey. How excellent, you've been sitting there patiently. Good to hear from you.
Great fries.
Just bear with me while I find the paper in my pen. Yes, so this paper relates to private sector housing enforcement policy and civil penalties policy. This is something we've discussed a number of times, and this policy we've had before, but there has been significant changes in this area arising from Renters' Rights Act, and I'll do, I think, about my fifth plug for a briefing for members internally about the impacts that the Renters' Rights Act will have on the private sector. The council has received some new burdens funding because there is additional enforcement work to be done in this space potentially. We haven't received a lot of new burdens funding, but we have received some, and perhaps you'll talk about how we've maximised the impact that will have in our enforcement work. So that'll be but fundamentally, Renters' Rights Act places significant constraints on private sector landlords, changes the security of tenancies and this sort of thing. And fundamentally, the council will be the body responsible for enforcing that across our district. As I've said a number of times, we try and, our initial step is to always work closely with our landlords. They're a very significant contributor to housing in the district, and many of them are indeed really very good. We held a session up at the hotel just outside Winchester in March. I think it was the end of March. To work with our landlords, to talk to them about the changes, how we were going to be applying those changes, how we would enforce them. And I think it was it was a very good session. I was there. It was well attended. I think it was sold out. of course, the risk there is that those were the good landlords who care the most and who are there to make sure that they're compliant with changes in law. And there will be some who perhaps were somewhat disinterested and who weren't there. So, you know, it's a challenge we're going to have. But I think the message from that is, you know, good landlords, we welcome them and we'll work closely with them such as we can. But, you know, in case of landlords not behaving, not following the law, then, you know, we will enforce and we will come down hard. So if you're a rogue landlord in Winchester, we will come down hard on you. And this is the policy that will underpin our approach to that. It's quite long. There's an appendix at the back that sets out the financial penalties for breaches of various pieces of legislation. But perhaps, Mr. Corey, if you'd like to give us an overarching position, please, that'd be helpful.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the Renters' Rights Act represents the most significant reform of the private rented sector in decades, and it introduces things like an abolition of Section 21 no-fault evictions, new offences, enhanced council investigatory powers, and a new statutory duty for councils to enforce the new landlord legislation, and expanded civil penalty fines of up to £40,000 for serious breaches. So to provide some context, before the Renters' Rights Act was introduced, a lot of the housing offences would fall within the Regulators Code. So we would have that opportunity to educate, deal with landlords informally before we took enforcement action. The new landlord legislation that's been introduced by the Renters' Rights Act falls outside of that code. So the local authority now has a statutory duty to enforce breaches of the new landlord legislation. And although we've been given some new burdens funding, which has helped with additional staffing resources, so we can try and be in the best position possible to be able to enforce this, it hasn't been enough for us to fund ourselves long term. The assumption from government is we will self-fund through consistent proportionate enforcement action. So the changes require the council to move from a predominantly advice-led and discretionary approach to a more proactive, risk-based and formal enforcement model. The report seeks approval for a new private sector housing enforcement policy and a new private sector housing civil penalties policy. And together, these policies will provide a clear, transparent and consistent framework for regulating standards within the private rented sector and meeting our statutory responsibilities as a local housing authority in terms of becoming more enforcement heavy. The proposed policies will ensure that tenants are better protected from poor housing conditions, illegal eviction, harassment and other unlawful practices, while providing responsible landlords and agents with clear expectations and a fair enforcement framework.
Thank you for that. I mean, you know, I think it's helpful sort of illustrative case study, and you can mark how well I've come to understand how Renters' Rights Act work, but as an example of how tricky this area could be, you know, what grounds for eviction, a no-fault eviction, well, effectively is gone. But in the case that the landlord is seeking to sell the property, but that of course means that if a tenant is evicted, well, someone needs to then presumably check that the landlord did indeed sell that property. John's peering up into the heavens. Is that a fair assessment? And I guess I'm trying to illustrate the potential workload and how this is not a straightforward piece of legislation to enforce.
Yeah, absolutely. So Section 21 is gone, no longer can serve no-fault eviction. There is a power under Section 8 where a landlord can serve no-fault eviction. What the government was concerned about is that would just become the new Section 21. So there's strict caveats associated to no-fault eviction. So a landlord can now only evict a tenant if A, they want to move back in the property or move a close family member back in the property, or if they plan to sell that property. What landlords cannot do is re-let that property within a 12-month period. So if a tenant was to serve a Section 8 notice to quit because the landlord wanted to move his family back into the property, that landlord doesn't move back into the property but relets it within a 12-month period, that's an offence and they can't do that. So we are already starting to see a lot of adverts where properties are being marketed incorrectly in terms of no DSS, no pets, short term only. these are all potential offences that we have a duty to fine landlords for, because it falls within the remit of the new landlord legislation. So there is an increase in workload already with the team in monitoring those, recording those, and trying to engage at an early stage with landlords before today to make sure that they are complying. But what we are going to do moving forward is have a look back at those adverts. If they're still wrong, we will be fining them.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I was at the forum, it was well attended, but I think on the whole they were the good landlords who came to seek guidance. It strikes me that this is a huge amount of work potentially. So I just wanted to clarify, make sure we understand expectations. How many homes fall into the remit here? And how many officers do we have to cover that? Because even with the comment you've just made about the adverts, it feels to me that you have a huge hill to climb, and we need to be clear about expectations and how we can deliver them, excuse me, given the limited funding that we have been granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. So in terms of private rented properties, I think there's an estimate that there's about 8,500 private rented properties in Winchester. So that is 8,500 properties that are being privately rented in the district. In terms of new burdens funding, we were given about £4 per private rented property. In terms of staffing, we've managed to grow the team by 3 members of staff in the last sort of 12 months or so. So the way I've tried to do it is I have employed a private sector housing officer whose role is to continue to work on what I refer to as existing private sector housing matters, complaints, empty properties, mobile home licensing, that sort of stuff. By employing that extra officer, it reduces the burden on the other private sector housing officer I've got, so they can focus on the day-to-day private sector housing standard work. I've employed an apprentice to complete an apprenticeship. Their role will be doing the admin into renters' rights offences, monitoring the database, looking at adverts online, emailing landlords. And we've also employed within the last couple of months a strategic housing or a strategic tenancy relations officer, and their role is to investigate the landlord offences. A lot of the new burdens funding has been spent on training officers. Within the report, it details that we've entered into some contracts with Justice for Tenants. We received £2,500 worth of free funding for them, which has really helped us with training and being given access to platforms that have been tried and tested in terms of being able to issue civil penalties that are proportionate and consistent. And I think having the support of Justice for Tenants will make the process a lot easier and will reduce the risk of appeals at tribunal. This is new for everyone, so I do think that as soon as landlords start getting these fines through the post, they will appeal them. We want policies and procedures in place that are as watertight as possible, so when it does get to that point, we are successful and we can recover that money. So I do think we're in a good position. It's going to be hard. It's new for everyone, but I think we've done as much as we can to ensure we are in a position to be able to hit the ground running, for want of a better word.
Thank you. Good luck.
Ms. Thorburn.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, in addition to that, it's something that we'll be constantly reviewing, because as John said, this is new, and if landlords are in breach and they fined and they pay, that's a revenue stream into the council. Now, if we're in a situation where we have got so many landlords that we need to take action against but don't have the staff, then I'll be liaising with Mr. Hendy and others to say, well, we need to grow this team. But when we decided how many officers, it was very hard to understand that need. So hence we've started with what John's explained, but it's something, Councillor Horrell, that we will continually review.
Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I suppose I'm sort of stuck, not understanding how we as a council are going to be complying with the Housing Act in keeping housing conditions in their district under review. I mean, that's the fundamental question, isn't it? So is that EPC databases? Is that relying on since advice clients complaining or coming to us, and then we identify the action and so on? I mean that seems to be the conundrum, given your lack of staff. And then how can we be proactive with the limited staff we've got? And the other part of my question is, will we be able to use the civil penalties to fully recover enforcement costs? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. So in terms of compliance with the Housing Act, the difficulty historically is lack of resource, but also lack of engagement from tenants because of fear of retaliation and fear of no fault. That fear is gone. So I do think the Renters' Rights Act will empower tenants to feel more confident to approach us with concerns and disrepair, to be able to help us go out and do it. The whole framework of everything that sort of led up to today in terms of implementing the renters' rights is an understanding that we do have to be more proactive. And I think it's important that every engagement we now have with residents, regardless of what their complaint is about, we're making inquiries about, you know, has your landlord done this in terms of the compliance with the Renters' Rights Act? Have they done this? The Housing Act has been amended slightly through the Renters' Rights Act, where historically we had to give a landlord 24 hours notice before a visit, which, you know, if a tenant will complain, say, I've got mold, we'll have to say to the landlord, or we've got 24 hours to come. Quite often, landlords have fixed the issue, you know, that they've cleared up, they've served that tenant notice before our visit. We don't have to do that anymore. We can give a landlord reasonable notice at any point. So we are now able to go into properties with the tenant consent to be able to investigate a wide remit of potential offences and potential housing standards. And, you know, as a team, a small team, we receive about 100 complaints a year. 39 odd those resulting in damp and mold. We resolve the majority of our complaints to a good standard, and you know, we are good at the moment of holding landlords to task. We will be even better now that we've got these new powers and these new frameworks to kind of to work from. In terms of civil penalties and recovery, one of my concerns was, or one of our concerns was, that we're not going to be able to recover these fines. We don't have the resource to do it. We don't have the experience to do it. What we have done is we have signed a contract with Justice for Tenants Legal. They will recover the fine on our behalf and charge us a fixed fee dependent on the rate of the fine. So let's say, for example, I don't, these aren't accurate figures, but it's a framework. If the fine's £5,000, if Justice for Tenants charge £500, we'll get 4,500, which to me is more cost effective than trying to outsource it to elsewhere or trying to do it in-house with officer costs, training, lack of resource, and sort of other pressures that every department is feeling at the moment. So I am confident that we have got a good framework in place, or a good matrix in place, to be able to recover these fines. And our arrangement with Justice for Tenants allows us to send our notices to them for them to review before we issue them, to make sure that they are as watertight as possible.
Thank you. That was very helpful, very comprehensive. There's clearly a deficit in the law. We're not here to fix the law, but in environmental terms, environmental undertaking, as I understand it with the EA, the money goes directly back and you don't have to fight this miasma of nonsense. So maybe that's something that we need to get our MP to engage with. This is the nonsense, really, isn't it? Anyway, thank you.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. Two questions I'd like clarified, please. Do we have a feel for how many of those estimated 8,500 properties are let via agencies? And would you expect a more professional approach to those that are let by agencies? And the second question is a lot easier. when is a sensible time for us to review what we're doing and how we're doing it, the cash flow, the resources, the number of cases? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Power. So in terms of a field of estimated properties, I can't answer that question. What I will say is the Renters' Rights Act has introduced legislation to make it very clear that there is no longer an excuse. Oh, I don't know. I rent my property, or I didn't know my brother-in-law is technically. There's no excuse. If you are the owner of a property, if you rent a property, if you are a superior landlord, if you are the owner of a freehold and a block of flats, there is no excuse. You can be fined. So I think in terms of how many properties are let by agencies, I don't think that matters anymore, because the Renters' Rights Act means that everyone needs to be professional and everyone needs to understand what their legal duties are and what they need to do to comply with the law. And, you know, we did held a landlords forum back in March, which was successful. We're looking at doing another one soon, and based on the feedback we got from that, it was from landlords wanting to understand what our approach to enforcement is. So I think that's a really good opportunity to say, this is our approach to enforcement. For these offences, there is no excuse.
Councillor Clear?
Oh,
There was a
sorry.
second.
There's,
Sorry.
regarding the review, we would hope to have completed that ready for the budget setting for 27-28, so by February of next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You may have, I think, covered some of these. Just two questions I was going to ask about our enforcement priorities. Is it safety, decency, rogue landlords, and how will we support tenants who may just fear retaliation from landlords?
I mean, I will answer that, and I've said it publicly. Your second question a few times. The tenants absolutely should not fear retaliation at all from landlords. I think the change that one of the many changes the Renters' Rights Act has brought about is that the pendulum has swung. You know, it is now people shouldn't be in fear of no fault evictions because it doesn't exist apart from the very few specific cases which Mr. Corrie outlined before. And I would think that I can give the assurance that Winchester City Council will be on the side of the tenant, you know, if it's a legitimate complaint. So tenants should feel, you know, empowered to, you know their rights and stand their ground. That's easy to say, but we'll keep saying it, and hopefully that will filter through. And the other points.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the other point was in terms of enforcement priorities. I think that, you know, the biggest priority of the private sector housing team is housing conditions. And, you know, our powers have been expanded in terms of the enforcement options we now have. So, you know, energy efficiency, housing conditions, making sure that tenants in the private sector live in homes that are free from hazards. We have a really handy new power. It's Section 6A of the Housing Act. It gives us the power to serve a civil penalty on a landlord where we identify a Category 1 hazard in their home. So we can go out and inspect a property. If we find it to be a Category 1 hazard, we can issue a civil penalty. We can also issue an enforcement notice. So our powers have greatly improved. And, you know, what the Renters' Rights Act is also doing is introducing a lot of the stuff within the social sector into the private rented sector. So we'll be getting Awaab's Law. We'll be getting the Decent Home Standard. So it is just providing us with an opportunity to be able to ensure that homes in the district, regardless of tenure, are free from hazards and safe and warm. The other thing I will say is that with the Decent Homes Standard, that includes all the changes to the minimum energy efficiency standards. We're getting a private landlord ombudsman that landlords have to be a member of. It'll be a fine not to be. We're getting a new private sector landlords database. All landlords have to register to this database, pay a fee. Again, it's a fine not to be a member. So there are so many ways in which local authorities can work with landlords to make sure that they are complying, that they have good quality homes, but equally so many ways in which we can hold those poor landlords to account where we just weren't able to in the past. So it really is a positive thing for your good landlords and for your tenants without that fear of retaliation.
Well, thank you, everyone. Just to sum up, I think, that's been really, really helpful. We are continuing to work with our landlords. We recognise the contribution they make to, providing good homes across the district. But we'll reiterate again, landlords that fall below the standard required by the law, we will enforce against them and we'll come down hard. And the other point is we should, assure tenants that we will stand by them and they shouldn't fear recrimination or retaliation for legitimate complaints they make about, perfectly reasonable, wanting a good, warm, safe home. So, thank you, everyone. The last thing is just the recommendations that are at page 260, which are that Cabinet Committee Housing approved the revised enforcement policy at Appendix 1, that we approve the proposed civil penalty policy at Appendix 2, and that we authorise the Corporate Head of Housing to make minor changes, or those linked to legislative change to those two policies. Are they agreed, please?
Agreed.
Thank you. And then the last note, agenda item 14, to note the dates of the next meeting, which are the 3rd of November 2026 and the 25th of January 2027. Thank you, everyone, for your time. It's just gone 1 o'clock. That'll do.